Irish Breakdown fans, Notre Dame fans across this wonderful country and the globe, we are here on this wonderful Tuesday 17th talking about it's still wild, talking about a Notre Dame playoff game that is coming up on Friday. You know, Trev, sitting there thinking about it, it's a pretty historic thing, and it's a historic thing that we're going to be there for, which I am so honored and honestly truly blessed to be a part of that, Trevor. I'm excited about that. But we're going to talk about that today. We're going to dive into today's show. We're going to start off actually with a little bit of a conversation about Marcus Freeman's contract extension. I have some thoughts on it, and Pete Bavacqua, the athletic director, had some comments on it today as well that we'll dive into. And then, of course, we'll talk about that maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Once we're done with that, we're going to dive into a breakdown of what I think is the most important matchup of this game, which is the Notre Dame offense against the Indiana defense. And so we're going to have some fun with that. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about the Notre Dame offense and why it works as well as it does. What is the reason behind the success? Why is why were they so successful this season in the things that they do? We'll talk about, the Notre Dame run game, the biggest questions and concerns. We'll talk about the Notre Dame pass game. We'll talk about the Indiana defense and just some different things that they do that can present some problems for you. We got some film, not some film. We got some screenshots of like different things that we're going to show that we're going to bring up during the game. We're going to talk stats, man. It is going to be a fun breakdown today, Trev. I'm ready to rock and roll, and I know you are too.
Yeah, I'm ready, man. I hate the fact that it's still only Tuesday. You know what I mean? Oh, my goodness. I mean, I was waking up hoping that it was going to be like Thursday after the show. I was going to get ready to drive up to South Bend. But unfortunately, we have a couple of days to wait. But it's exciting. I mean, you touched on it in the opening, man. And Notre Dame Stadium is one of the most iconic venues in all of sports, I would make the argument. And very rarely when something has been around for that long do you get to experience something for the first time. So it's really awesome that, we're going to be up there and we're going to be a part of it. We have the tailgate going on afterwards, or before. So I'm excited to be a part of everything. I'm excited to see the game. I'm ready to go, man. It's time. It is time.
So, Trev, we this kind of happened a couple days ago, and you and I haven't had a chance to talk about it. I know that they talked about it on IB Nation Sports Talk, but I wanted you and I to kind of have a chance to talk about it. And I thought today, after the press conference from Pete Bavacqua, it was a proper time to talk about it. And that is that Marcus Freeman signed a contract extension with Notre Dame. It is reported now. Notre Dame doesn't release contract details for coaches. It's always laugh whenever you see these things like schools that spend the most on their football programs or highest paid coaches, and you always see these. It's all public schools. You never see the private schools on there because they don't have to release information because they're not a state agency, so they don't have to release that information. And so we don't know what the contract is. We do know, however, that Marcus Freeman's original contract was a 5-year contract, so he has 2 years left on that. The reports are, and the people that reported the numbers, I believe, are trustworthy news people. Heather Dinich reported it. I believe that Nicole Auerbach reported it, and I also believe that Ross Dellinger all reported it. And the Notre Dame media will give national people like that information that they won't give us. So if Heather Dinich is reporting from a source that it's a 4-year extension, I think there's a lot of merit to that being an accurate reflection of what Coach Freeman's new contract is going to look like, which is a 6-year extension. And then Pete Bavacqua, the athletic director, spoke today about a lot of different things. It was actually a very informative press conference. I was very impressed by it. But he talked about the fact that there was no discussion about there being any sort of opt-out or any sort of change in the contract for exceptions to go to the NFL or to go to Ohio State. That was a question that was specifically asked of Marcus Freeman. And so that was, I thought, interesting. And from what I understand, that's not something that Marcus Freeman brought up and Notre Dame rejected. I'm told that's something that Marcus Freeman never broached with Notre Dame. Now, we don't know terms of the buyout, things along those lines. Those are things that people ask. We don't know the answers to that. But what we do know is he's signed an extension. What we believe to be true is that it is a 4-year extension, which puts him at Notre Dame for 6 more years. And we're also pretty confident saying he is now one of the highest paid coaches in college football, which is going to put him up somewhere around $10 million, maybe $1 million or $2 million less, maybe $1 million over. But he's going to be the highest paid coach in college football. So we're going to first talk about that, Trevor, and then we'll talk about something else that Pete Bavacqua mentioned today also when it comes to the extension that he signed with Marcus Freeman. But first things first, Trev, just your overall thoughts on Notre Dame announcing that Marcus Freeman, not so much the timing, we'll talk about the timing next, but just your thoughts on Notre Dame. What were your thoughts when Notre Dame announced that Marcus Freeman was signing a 4-year extension?
Yeah, man. I mean, big picture, I think they signed the right guy for the job. Now, there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding, is Marcus Freeman a championship caliber coach? Well, luckily for us, we're going to find that out over the next, 6 weeks. But I don't think there's any doubt that Marcus Freeman is the right person to lead this program. You go through and you look at the things that you look for in a Notre Dame man and somebody who wants to, better this university. And he comes from that old school mindset of, leave something better than you found it, which is a tall order when you're talking about a school like Notre Dame. And I think Marcus Freeman really embodies who is a really good, ideal collegiate football coach. He invests in young people. And he knows that to build success, you have to find ways to get young men to perform above their God-given abilities. And he doesn't view this as, a destination or a lily pad destination to get him to that next thing. He loves being here. And you can tell he loves this program. You see him going to women's basketball games. You see him going to men's basketball games and supporting the other Notre Dame athletics that he's a part of. So he views Notre Dame as like the whole big picture, not just I'm just here to be a football coach and don't talk to me about anything else. Mm-hmm. So in those regards, and just seeing how much, the players and everybody around the program respects him, I couldn't be more thrilled about Marcus Freeman getting the extension that he did. And like I said, the biggest question for him is he the championship caliber head coach? I think he's recruiting at that level, getting there in most areas. I think he speaks that way. Now it's just the product on the field has to reflect everything that we're hearing, and we're going to find that out here soon.
And let's be real about something. There's 134 now Division I football teams. That question exists for 132 of those football teams. Because unless you're the head football coach at Clemson right now, or you're the head football coach at Georgia right now, nobody else has experience winning championships at this level. And especially now that Mac Brown's, because you could say Mac Brown, but even then it's like, okay, but he did that at Texas. Is he going to do that at North Carolina?
Sure.
Didn't do it the first time and didn't do it and won't do it this time. But those are kind of the questions. Everybody has that question right now. Ohio State has that question. Michigan has that question. Penn State has that question. Alabama has that question. Texas has that question. And that's something that Notre Dame's going to have to – we're going to find out, right, if he can be that. But I think it was obviously a big hire. I second everything that you said. And Pete Bavacqua talked about that this today as well. He talked a lot about how Marcus Freeman interacts with the young people, not just on the football team, but just at the school. You see Coach Freeman and his wife Joanna at, almost every women's basketball game I've seen so far this year. You know what I mean? And I just find it ironic. I usually don't talk about coaches' wives, so I just thought this was hilarious. It was like them, and I think it was Kayla McBride was there and a couple other people that looked to be famous. And I'm like, yep. Coach Freeman's wife is winning the sneaker game right now. She had some serious kicks on the other day in that one. I was like, okay, there you go, Mrs. Freeman. There you go. All in good fun. But, it's just someone who's embraced. That's why I never bought the whole, if Ohio – I've said this for a while. If Ohio State comes calling, I'm not worried about that. I don't think Marcus Freeman is one of those people. Like, would Marcus Freeman in certain circumstances jump at the chance to become a head coach at his alma mater? In certain instances and circumstances, absolutely. Is he going to do that now that he's at Notre Dame? I never felt that was something that was going to happen. That's not a shot at Ohio State. It's just sometimes you find a job that you didn't realize how much you love that job. And I think that's what Marcus Freeman is dealing with right now, and why I believe that this is, I just wasn't worried about it. And then the whole NFL thing, I just kind of thought was a joke. That was nothing more than, in my opinion, leverage. First of all, it was just BS made up rumors in some instances. What people in the media have a tendency to do now is to take their own wish lists and then turn it into an article and say, well, this is what I'm hearing. And they'll pretend that it's information because nobody can question them on it. Well, who's your source? I can't reveal my sources. That's not right. I know people do this. I know for a fact that people do this. Now, I don't know who I don't know specifically. No, I'm not going to say who, but I do know some people do that, and I'm sure it's more prominent than you realize, especially for some of the not big-name people. Like Heather Dinich doesn't need to do that. Ross Dellinger doesn't need to do that. Pete Thamel doesn't need to do that. I'm talking about like some of the smaller people that are starting a lot of these rumors that aren't known. They're not famous people. They're just trying to get their clicks. The other part of it is anything that was legit in that regard was Marcus Freeman's agent, in my opinion, this is a guess. It would be nothing more than Marcus Freeman's agent being smart and saying, hey, I'm trying to get a contract negotiation that I was told started between the agent and the school back over the summer, because an agent's got to do his job. And so that's what you do. Hey, look, these other schools are talking to me, and they're talking to my client and all this other kind of stuff, these NFL teams. I never saw Marcus Freeman as an NFL coach. Not that he's not capable of it, but everything that he seems to be about is about young people and developing young people. And it would surprise me if he chose to go to that next level and coach that level. So at least now, maybe in 10 years, if he's had a lot of success and he's won a couple titles and he's like, you know what, I'm tired of this year-round grind, and they haven't fixed some of the things that are going on right now, maybe down the road. But right now, and I'm talking like 10 years and a couple titles later is what I'm talking about. So I just felt like Notre Dame was the right fit. And the timing thing, Trev, so you and I had said we thought that they would get a deal done before the playoffs started. So that didn't surprise us. What surprised me was that they announced the deal before the first playoff game. That did surprise. I just thought they'd at least wait till that was over, maybe till the playoffs over. But here's why I think, and again, this is not intel, this is just my opinion. Here's why I think that they're doing what they're doing and why I'm on board with it. Because my whole thing is no distractions, just, focus on the team. But Marcus Freeman kept getting asked about it. He was asked again, I think, last week about the NFL and the rumors in the NFL. I'm quite confident that teams recruiting against Notre Dame in the portal right now are using some of those rumors to point to portal kids like, hey, you don't even know if Marcus Freeman's going to be there. Ohio State likes him. The NFL's calling. That Bears job came open. That's not gonna work till that's not gonna come up until like February. So this is going to kind of be around, and this window's happening pretty quick. And some of your own players may be kind of buying into that and thinking, well, if he's not going to be here, I may jump into portal now. I think it was announced when it was because there also needed to be a level of we need to quiet all that stuff down, because people in the media are going to keep talking about it. And his answers weren't exactly, guys, I'm not going to the NFL. I have no interest in going to the NFL. It was more of like, hey, look, when you have team success, you're going to have individual recognition and success, and that's all that this is. He never said, I'm interested. He never said he wasn't. It was more just sort of which honestly, if you're in the midst of a contract negotiation, you probably shouldn't admit that the leverage you have is not something you would consider. This way, he can now be like, no more questions about that. I'm signed. We're good. Let's move forward. And I think it got rid of one of those negative talking points that schools were using about Coach Freeman, who's a hot name right now for the NFL and for Ohio State. And I think it makes a lot of if that's happening, and I believe that it is, right, then it makes a lot of sense for them to say, let's get this out of the way now. They announced it, Sunday, right? So we get this whole week now. It wasn't announced like 2 days before the game. It was announced on Sunday. Monday, they're hot and heavy into their week of practice. It's over with. It's done with. I'm not worried about it. Let's move forward and let's go win a football game. So even though I thought that they would wait till after the playoffs, because I think Coach Freeman really wanted to have – it's why they don't want any portal stuff being talked about. It's why they won't – it's why they're doing a lot to kind of keep the portal stuff of who they're looking out and who they're looking after quiet, because they don't want anything to distract this football team's race to a championship. And that's really what it boils down to. And so I think you are almost kind of forced to a degree to say, hey, we need to get this done now. We need to answer this now, get it over with, announce it on a Sunday, and then we can move forward with our game prep. I don't think it's a coincidence it happened Sunday night before they really dove hot and heavy into game week, because yesterday's Monday practice was essentially their Tuesday practice. And the Tuesday practice is the first like really hot and heavy of game week type of practice. And so now it's over with. We're going out tomorrow, and it's time to rock and roll and focus on beating Indiana. So I think that's why they did it when they did it. And if I'm right on the read of this situation, it actually makes a lot of sense for them to announce it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, I think they use this distraction to nullify the other distractions, right? To your point, talking about the transfer portal and all this stuff heating up, Notre Dame is getting ready to, Notre Dame's getting ready to play in the first ever home playoff game, and they don't need the distraction of, well, is their coach going to be here after this season? There's all these head coaching jobs in college coming open. There's the Bears job that's going to be vacant. Odds are there's going to be more NFL head coaching jobs that are going to be vacant at the end of the season if things keep trending the way that they are. So, I like the timing more than I thought that I was going to, if that makes sense. Because, you and I talked a lot before. I think that something could be done. I think they're going to wait till after the playoffs to announce it, or at least until after the first playoff win. But given all of the other things that have happened this season and all the other outside noise, I think they kind of use this to tamper some of those down. It's done. It's out of the way. And I agree with you. I think the timing that it coming out on Sunday is fitting. So then you just have essentially an entire week of normal practice to say, hey, it's time to focus on Indiana. It's time to go. It's time to get the team ready. So I agree.
So, Trev, that's done. That's over with. They signed Marcus Freeman. He's good to go. Now we can dive into the Notre Dame matchup with the offense against the Indiana defense. And Trev, this, just looking at a big picture, this is a huge, huge matchup. Like, obviously in a playoff game, both sides of the ball are big matchups. Like, they're huge matchups. But the Notre Dame defense against the Indiana offense is going to be a huge matchup as well. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. But we do expect there to be some level of, they're both going to have some level of success against each other. Notre Dame's going to have their moments. The defense is going to have their moments. I think this matchup right here is without a doubt the most impactful matchup in whether or not Notre Dame can win this football game, because a lot of the talk about Indiana, when you look at kind of their success this season, a lot of people talk about their offense, but not enough people talk about how good their defense has been this season. And you can talk all you want about them, played anybody, and all those things are true. They have not really played any elite offenses, and I don't think Ohio State is an elite offense this season either. You and I have talked a lot about that this season, but they haven't played a lot of teams that are great scoring teams. But I don't care who you're playing. When you're giving up 14.7 points per game in a Power 5 conference like the Big Ten, I don't care if you are playing the bottom half of that league, and you're only giving up 244.8 yards per game and 4.1 yards per play. Trevor, I don't care what league you're in. That's really good. Yeah. I don't care what part of the league you're playing. That's really good. And the Notre Dame offense, which for much of the season has been considered the weak spot of the team, even though statistically it doesn't necessarily look that way, you're able to say, listen, you beat up on a lot of inferior opponents. You're saying the same thing about the Notre Dame offense that people are saying about the Indiana defense. And I think both of them are very good units. But this has not been the strength of Notre Dame team for much of the year. Can they get this part of the team really rolling? It's like Riley Leonard said the other day, I don't feel like I've played my best football yet. Well, he hasn't, and this offense hasn't. Is that going to – it may never happen. Does it happen now? We don't know. But this matchup, just kind of big picture, Trevor, this is going to be huge for so many reasons. This is going to be huge and a big part of this game. If Notre Dame wins this game – unless their defense just plays elite lights out and they win a 17-14 game, I think the offense is going to really have to be at its best, which makes the matchup against what is a pretty good Indiana defense very important. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the offense is the key to victory for me. I mean, big picture. And obviously some people, you have to score points to win a football game, and absolutely true. But then you go back through and you look, and to your point about the defense playing lights out, we watched Notre Dame lose a football game where the defense allowed 16 points, one offensive touchdown. We've seen that a lot more than people would like to admit the last few years. Mm-hmm. I mean, they lost to Ohio State last year, giving up 17 points?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
they lost to Stanford in 22, giving up 16 points. So it's just, you go through and you look at what this team needs. They gave up 19
offensive points to Marshall as well, if you remember that game. They only gave up 19 points to Marshall's offense. Mm-hmm. Only held Ohio State to 24 points the year before. We've seen a lot of games. And Trev, to your point, it's not just about, you got to score. It's you can score a lot of points not playing at your best against a lot of teams on your schedule. It's can you play at your best when you're playing against the best? That's really what the question is.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you keep the football on the field? Can you sustain drives? I mean, we talked yesterday at length about the lack of depth in the Notre Dame cornerback room and how IU has an arsenal of receivers. You need to help out your defense. You need to sustain drives. You need to eat the clock. I mean, there's a lot of things that the offense needs to do that is just outside of the realm of, well, duh, they have to score touchdowns, of course, right? So it's massive, Not only is it going to be a battle on the field, it's a battle in narratives. I think you hit the nail on the head for IU's defense. Yeah, I mean, they held nobody to 14.6 points. You talk about Notre Dame's offense. Yeah, they scored 39.8 points a game versus a bunch of nobodies. So obviously something's going to have to give, right? And so I'm excited to dive into it with you and talk about how can that give in Notre Dame's favor, what that's going to look like. It's going to be a good one today, man. I'm excited.
No question. So when we first talk about this offense, this matchup, let's first kind of go over both of these units. And when you first start off, Trev, it really comes down to the matchup of the run games. The Notre Dame run defense rush offense against the Indiana run defense. This is a super intriguing matchup. And you look at the numbers here as we dive into this part of the matchup, and statistically, it's great. It's not even just good on good; it's great on great. And you're talking about a Notre Dame offense that ranks 10th in the country in rushing yards per game at 224.8. And if you dive into it a little bit further, you realize that number is actually even more impressive when you take several factors into consideration. Number one is Notre Dame is the number 3 rushing offense at the Power 4 level. Numbers 1 through 7 are all G5 schools: Army, Jack State, Liberty, New Mexico, UNLV, Boise State, Navy. It's not till UCF at 8 and then Tennessee at 9 that you start to get where Notre Dame is. And then the next closest team behind Notre Dame is Kansas, down at 211 yards all the way down to 13. But then the other thing that I look at is Trev, is when you look at games against teams that where they only played Power 5 teams, Notre Dame jumps up to 5th in rushing yards in 8 games against Power 4 teams at 220.9 yards per game. And the 4 teams ahead of them are all G5 teams that only played 1 to 3 games. Boise State played 3, New Mexico played 3, Air Force played 2, James Madison played 1. Notre Dame is head and shoulders above those teams. The other teams in the league, the next closest behind Notre Dame is 7 yards behind them. And then when you look at yards per carry, same type of deal. If you just look at all games, Notre Dame ranks 3rd in yards per carry. Only New Mexico and Boise State are ahead of them. And Boise State with Ashton Genty is 0.02 ahead of Notre Dame. Notre Dame is at 6.30. Boise State's at 6.32. And then if you also look, the next closest Power 5, so Notre Dame is number 3, but they're number 1 amongst Power 4 teams. The next closest team behind Notre Dame in yards per carry, Notre Dame at 6.3, is Kansas State at 5.86. Behind them is UCF at 5.77. The next closest Power 5 team is Louisville, all the way down at number 11 at 5.6 yards per carry. So I just think it puts context into just how good Notre Dame has been. And it's the same story too, Trev, when you look at them against G5 and against Power 4 games. Notre Dame is the 4th overall team in yards per carry in games where your opponent was a Power 4 team. The only 3 ahead of them were Boise, New Mexico, Louisiana, Lafayette. Notre Dame was a 5.99. The next closest to Notre Dame amongst P4 teams was K-State at 5.51. So it just kind of gives you some context about how dynamic and how explosive and how good this Notre Dame offense has been all season at running the football. And there's a lot of reasons why, but these numbers in a lot of ways, Trevor, speak for themselves for this Notre Dame offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this goes to show the evolution of this offense as well, because at the start of the season, we went through and we talked about how Notre Dame needs to figure out a way to be a more efficient running team, right? Because before it was a lot of those, 1 yard gain, 2 yard gain, 1 yard lost, 46-yard run. And now when you go and you look at some of these numbers, I think it speaks to, especially in the last 4 games, they have gotten really, really good at building around an efficient run game. So now it's not just big plays. Now, if you watch the team and you watch the games, you know that they are chock full of big plays. You got Jadarian Price housing from 40 yards out. You have Jeremiah Love jumping over people. You have Riley Leonard trying to jump over people. But, you go through and you look at what this team has been able to do on the ground and its evolution throughout the season, gives you really good confidence. I've been tooting this horn since championship weekend. The teams that have been able to run the ball for the most part in big games like this have been able to prevail. So the way I see it, it's complementary. It's an and, But when you have that foundation that Notre Dame has with their run game, it makes it all the more interesting. And when you look at IU's defense, this is from a statistical matchup, this is what you want a playoff game to look like, right? Like you want it to look like this. It's best on best. You know, they have multiple statistics for rushing offense and rushing defense when you compare the two that rank inside of the top 10. You know, you go through and you look at Notre Dame ranks where they do in runs of 30 yards or more. You look at where IU ranks in the runs of 30 yards or more that they've given up. So it puts you in a really fun spot to look and say, you know what? Name aside, I get that it's IU, whatever. I don't care who they played. These are the kind of matchups that you want to see when you get into the postseason.
Well, Trev, to put numbers to what you just said, and you look at this Notre Dame offense and what it has done in big plays, Notre Dame ranks tied for 4th in most runs of 30-plus yards or more. There's only one Power 4 team tied with them, and that is Baylor at 16. Baylor had 30 more carries this season than did Notre Dame. Every other team ahead of them or tied with them, Jack State is tied. They've played 13 games. Navy is ahead of them with one more. They've played the same number of games, but they've run the ball a lot more. They're a G5 team. UNLV, who played 13 games, has 20. Boise State, who's played 13 games and has the best back in college football, has 20 as well. And then you look at where they rank in gains of 40 yards or more. They're tied for 5th. There's only one Power 5 team ahead of Power 4 team ahead of them. That's Louisville at 12. Cincinnati's tied with them at 10. If you look at where they rank in most runs of 50 yards or more, they're tied for 2nd with South Alabama and Navy. Only Boise State is ahead of them. Here's a crazy stat. Notre Dame is tied for 2nd at 7. Next is Boise State, who has 13, thanks to Ashton Jeanty. Notre Dame is also tied for 3rd in most runs of 60 yards or more with 5. They're tied with Miami of Ohio, which shocked me when I saw that, who's played 13 games. And then Navy is 2nd with 6. And then Boise State is number 1 with 11, which is a really wild number. And then Notre Dame is also tied for 6th in most gains of 70 or more. They have 2. Boise has 5. I just want to put that into context to just remind people of how amazing Ashton Jeanty was this season. But it just kind of shows you that Notre Dame has been a really dynamic offense all season long. And it's not one guy. This is about Boise State. It's all from one guy. I mean, that's not it's not somehow some sort of backhanded insult against Boise State. It's why would you give anyone else the football if you have Ashton Jeanty on your football team? It's more so just saying like how special he was. But what makes Notre Dame so difficult, in my opinion, Trevor, is that they have so many different guys that can do it. And, you know, we obviously, I'm looking at Boise right now. They have only one other ball carrier went over 50 yards, was not him, and that was Dylan Riley, who's a backup running back. But when you look at it, Trev, it's what makes Notre Dame unique is that it's Jeremiah Love, it's Jadarian Price, it's Riley Leonard, can all rip off big plays. And then they just put in, I don't know, Aeneas Williams in the game against at the time, the number 3 rush defense in the country. And he comes in and he goes for a 50-plus yard touchdown run. And I promise you, if you put Kedron Young in the game behind the first team offensive line, he'd be able to go for big plays. That's what makes him so dangerous, is that it's not just one guy. You can bottle up Jeremiah Love, as we pointed out in the Florida State game. You know, Florida State bottled up Jeremiah Love. They did as good a job as any team in college football this year at bottling up Jeremiah Love. He had 9 carries and had 19 yards on 9 carries. Think about that. But then Jadarian Price comes in and rips off a 65-yard touchdown run and goes 7 carries for 95 yards. Riley Leonard rushes for 70 yards on 11 carries. And next thing you know, that's 165 rushing yards on 18 carries from 2 guys not named Jeremiah Love. Right? So you can put all that energy in trying to stop Jeremiah Love, and it doesn't matter because somebody else is going to step up. That's what's been the story all season. It wasn't Jeremiah that sparked the offense against A&M. It was Jadarian Price. And then Jeremiah put that game away with back-to-back 20-yard runs to end that game, basically. And that's what makes this run game so difficult to defend. And I think as the season has gone on, they've gotten more and more efficient because the line is playing more consistently. Early in the season, Trevor, it was 2-yard run, -1, 3-yard run, 1-yard run, 50, you know, because they were a very inefficient offense. And the line was a big reason for that. They'd have a great block and then 2-3, just like, dude, what are you doing? As the season has worn on, Joe Rudolph's unit has gotten a lot better at just getting those 4 and 5 yard gains as well. Those are huge. Instead of going for -1 or +2 on 1st and 10, now you're getting 4. Now you're getting 5. Those aren't, oh, wow, you're going to kill these teams with 4-yard runs. But that stuff matters because now you're in 2nd and 6 or 2nd and 5, and everything is in front of you. Or it's 2nd and 6, and you rip off another 4-yard run, and now it's 3rd and 2, and you have everything on your playbook is at your disposal on 3rd and 2. Everything. And that's what's made this offense so difficult running the football is as the line has started to play more cohesively and as a unit. And I mean, you look at that last game against USC, Trevor, and some of the run blocks in that game were just like, that's teaching tape right there. That's teaching tape. That's stuff Joe Rudolph is going to be using at some offensive line clinic this summer on how to, you know what I mean? How to block these. He's going to be using the Army and the USC games as teaching tape on how to block inside zone, how to block duo, and things along those lines. And they really had it rolling, and that's really been the big difference. The big plays have been there all year. It's the efficiency that has gotten so much better, which is why Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Riley Leonard, well, not Riley Leonard because they used him differently, but why Price and Love have a higher yards per carry in the last 5 games than they did in the first 6 games is because of that right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to further your point about just the different running backs that they have, not only do they have 4 guys, they have 4 guys that all run different, right? Like it's, you talk about it all the time. Football's a game about matchups, and it's really hard to prepare and match up with a team who has 4 guys who can efficiently run the ball that all do it differently. Because there's not one thing that the defense can key on of, oh, hey, this is how you kind of bottle up a Jeremiah Love. Well, you put in 24, and Jadarian Price runs differently than he does. Try to bottle up both of them. Riley Leonard runs different than they both do. From a big picture standpoint, yes, there are all 3. I'll put Aeneas Williams in that conversation too. But the big 3, they're all hard to tackle, but in different ways. Jeremiah Love is a much stronger runner than what he was last year. He's still very elusive. He has getaway speed once he reaches that next level. Jadarian Price is probably the best lateral cutter on the team. I mean, his east-west vision is insane. I think of that touchdown run he had against Army where he broke a tackle in the hole and then just bounced it outside and like that. So, and then you have a guy like Riley Leonard, who I've said all year, people can't tackle him, and I don't understand why, but they can't. So you have this 3-headed monster attack where they just all do it differently. So, it's a matchup nightmare, man. It really is.
It is funny because it's hard to explain. It's like he doesn't look fast. He doesn't look like the kind of guy you'd expect to be this real dynamic runner, but he is. And he's a lot better athlete than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Yeah. And that makes him a difficult guy to bring down. I don't think people understand how smooth and athletic he really is and how fast he actually is until you face it. And you hear people talk about that all the time. Like, we didn't really understand just how good he was at just how athletic he was or just how fast he was until you watch him play. And that's a big part of what's led them to be successful. But at the end of the day, Trevor, success in the postseason, it's great to have elite backs, but you're going to be playing, at least in Notre Dame's draw, they're going to be playing teams that are pretty good at stopping the run, or at least are at times. Like, you look like a team like Georgia late in the year, they were terrible stopping the run against UMass and Georgia Tech, and then they just dominated Texas, right? Like, they're a very inconsistent run game. You know that you're going to get the best of what they have to offer in a quarterfinal game, right? If you go play Penn State in the semifinals, or if you go play SMU in the semifinals, those are teams that are really good at stopping the run, or at least they, for most of the season, they've been. So that's going to be part of it, is until maybe the championship game, and that's assuming you get Oregon. You're not – they're a good run defense, but not a great run defense by any stretch. Penn State showed that. Unless Ohio State makes it through or Tennessee makes it through, you're not going to face a great run defense in the championship game either. The first 3 rounds, though, you're going to face very, very good run defenses. And I know there's a lot of skepticism about, is Indiana really that good and things along those lines, Trevor? And it's a lot like the conversation we had about Army, right? And I'm not saying like, oh, they're going to go run for 270 on 29 carries. No, I'm not saying that. That's a different conversation. What I'm saying is, we can say two things at once, and two things can be very true. And one is we can say, look, Indiana has not faced any good rushing offenses all year. We can say that and say that with confidence. And it's honestly, it's not even a thing, Trevor, that's even debatable. I mean, anyone that's got any kind of common sense, any kind of intellectual honesty that covers this Indiana football team should be able to look at them and say, hey, listen, they haven't played any good teams running the football. This year they played, if you look at it in order of highest to lowest, they faced the number 59, 69, 93, 95, 104, 106, 110, 110, 118, 123, and number 131 rushing offenses in the country this year. You can say that and say, hey, listen, guys, the reality is they're just not playing a lot of teams that are good at running the football. And you'd be true. You'd be accurate. But they're not the only team in the country, Trevor, that hasn't played a lot of great rushing offenses this year.
Sure.
And nobody touches them when it comes to their rush defense. And we'll pull those numbers up again. Not only do they have the number one rush defense in the country this year, Trevor, it's not really close. I mean, there's not really a close second. They're at 70.8. The next closest is 83. Ole Miss at 83 yards per game. The next closest after them is Michigan at 92. There's only 8 teams in all of college football that are under 100. Tennessee, Ohio State, UCLA, Ohio, SMU, Michigan, and Ole Miss, and then, of course, Indiana. And they're at 70.8. So we'll talk specifically about their schedule, but I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are going to make a mistake if they think that this is just some average run defense that gets by not playing anybody. Because I think it's in 9 of their 12 games, I think 9, maybe 10 of their 12 games, they held their opponents well under their season average in yards per game or in total yards and also yards per carry. And that's the sign of a good run defense is one that, okay, yeah, you play nobody good, but you're not giving up 10 more yards than they all average, and that's why you're top 10. You're holding them all under your season average. And I think we would do a grave disservice if we tried to dismiss how good this Indiana run defense has been all season.
Yeah, I mean, if you use the argument, here's how I look at it, right? If you use the argument that IU hadn't played anybody, that's why their stats are so good, you could, to an extent, use that same argument against Notre Dame, which is why it's not fair, right? Like, it's, if Notre Dame's going to get credit for, yes, they didn't really play anybody overly good this year. Like, they've played really good football teams, but I don't think they played the elite caliber of football teams. They played some that are close, But if you're going to use that argument for Notre Dame and say, but they blew everybody out, and then look at Indiana's schedule and say, well, they didn't play anybody, so their stats don't mean anything.
Right.
That's when you can't, right? But this all feeds into why this matchup is significantly more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out, but I'm with you. I mean, Indiana held, oh gosh, I broke this down like last week. I think Indiana held like 3 of their opponents to their lowest rushing totals of the season. They held Michigan State to negative 36 yards for the game. So you go through and you look at what they did. I mean, it's nothing short of impressive.
Right.
Regardless of who it is.
Well, perfect example is Ohio State. Ohio State ranks 59th in rushing offense this season. They're the best rushing offense that Indiana's faced all season. And they rank 59th. But they are 28th in the country in yards per carry this season, which I've always said is a better can be a better indicator of your overall success over the course of a season than total yards, because yards talks about usage. And I could point to teams that have rushing offenses that score that have a lot of points, or have a lot of yards, but it's because they run the ball a lot. I mean, you look at some of these teams like Northern Illinois this season ran for 207 yards a game. They were sub 5 per carry because they ran it a lot. Same thing with Tulane this season, right? Same thing with Tennessee. Tennessee was 9th in college football at 232 yards per game, Trevor. They were 7.2 yards ahead of Notre Dame per game. They ran the ball 117 times more than Notre Dame. So do they have a better rushing offense because they average 8 more yards per game than Notre Dame? Or did they just do it a lot more? Like, where would Notre Dame be in total yards per game if they ran the ball the same amount of times as Tennessee did? And that's the thing you look at. Actually, I'm gonna actually do that here, Trevor. I'm gonna tell you what that number would be. But if Notre Dame this season ran the ball as many times as Tennessee did, so let's go here. 6.30 yards per carry. Let's say 545 carries. That's 3,433 yards. Divide that by 12 games. Notre Dame would be averaging 286.1 yards per game. That'd be number 2 in all of college football behind Army. Right? So that's the thing about it is you have to look at context. But you look at that Ohio State team. Yeah, Ohio State didn't run for a ton of yards this year, but they were a pretty good offense when it comes to big plays and yards per play, and they kept them in check in that regard too, Trevor. And that's the whole point about this is you have to be able to look at different aspects of this to evaluate a football team and say, okay, Ohio State didn't run for a lot of yards. They were a high yards per carry team. Ohio State only averaged 3.97 yards per carry against Indiana. They only rushed for 115 yards. So even though they aren't a great rushing offense, they held them well below their season average.
And it's also worth noting that I'm pretty sure 50 or 60 of that 115 came late in the fourth quarter when Travion broke one on like their last offensive possession.
Yep.
So,
they shut them down. They shut down their run game. And those are the things you got to look at and say, hey, yeah, I know that was Ohio State's 3rd lowest total of the season in total yards. It was also their 3rd lowest yards per carry average of the season. And that's the whole point is you have to be able to look at it and say, no, they haven't played anybody. They haven't played anybody like Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it, but they're still really good. Does that mean they're going to shut Notre Dame down? No, I'm not saying that. It's more about understand what they're facing so you can have proper context to the performance, whatever it is, good or bad, right? And if Notre Dame rushes for 85 yards, I'm not going to be like, hey, great job. You went 15 over their season average. That will not be unless they did it on like 15 carries because they threw for 400 yards. You know what I'm saying? But most likely that's not going to be what we're going to say. But it's if they rush for 175 yards, you're like, dude, that may have been way under Notre Dame's season average, but that was really good because they went over 100 beyond Indiana's total. So those are the things you look at to properly understand, how good this rush defense is, which also puts some importance on how good they're going to be. Because let's talk about why they're good at stopping the run, Trevor. It's not because teams throw all over them, because let's put some numbers here on this one as well. Their pass defense only ranks 9th in college football. So this isn't a team that's given up very few rushing yards because everybody passes on them. Like I think a team that Notre Dame faced that way this year, if I'm being honest with you, is a team like Stanford. I don't know why I say that. It's somebody pointed out to me that I say that a lot. D-Troll Hunter pointed that out to me that I say that a lot, and now I can't stop hearing it every time I say it. And it bothers me now. So thanks a lot, D-Troll Hunter. You're in my head now. You're in my head. But when you look at the numbers, for example, Stanford ranks 39th in college football in yards allowed per game. Right? It's a pretty good number. Rushing, but they're 70th in yards per carry allowed. Right? Well, why the difference? Well, here's why. Because their pass defense is terrible. Because their pass defense ranks 131st in all of college football. So guess what teams do when they go play Stanford? We're going to throw on them. So we're naturally going to not run as much because their pass defense is terrible.
Right.
So those are the things that you look at, Trev, and say you have to have proper context. And Indiana's not a highly ranked rushing defense because people throw on them. Now, you could say that part of it is because they have jumped on so many teams early that teams don't run on them as much. That's fair, but they still rank 2nd in all of college football in fewest yards allowed per attempt.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter how you spin it, this is a really good rush defense that Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared for. So let's talk about why, Trev. And I think the thing that starts off is there's a lot of experience coming back in this system, in this defense. You have 2 starting defensive linemen. I think you're probably your 2 best defensive linemen, maybe 2 of your 3 best defensive linemen, Mikhail Kamara and then a James Carpenter. I think it's a debate whether who's better between Carpenter and CJ West. I think there's a debate between those two. But two of your 3 best defensive linemen are JMU transfers, and both starting inside linebackers are JMU transfers. So these are not, as we talked about yesterday, we need to reiterate, these aren't guys that you step in and say, hey, listen, you're first-year starters, you're a bunch of portal guys, you all got to kind of come together. There's a lot of, they already knew what they were doing, coming into that game, coming into the season, which has helped them maybe catch up to speed a lot. So number one is experience. And number two, this is a game plan. This is a defensive coordinator that has a great deal of awareness of who his players are. And he knows we can't line up against Ohio State and Michigan and even some of the other teams in the Big Ten schedule and just play, this is what we do. We're going to line up and play ball like Notre Dame does at times, right? See ball, fly to the ball, get to the ball. They can't do that. They don't have the personnel, and he knows this, to do that. And so what they do is they do a lot of things schematically to mess with you. They do a lot of things that they're just throwing different things at you you're not used to seeing from a run stopping standpoint. They trigger defenders from all over the field. Literally all 11 players on the field are potential run blitzing candidates. The way that they defend, they will, and you think a corner fire is not always meant to be a passing situation type of stop. They will do it on first, second down. Same thing with their safeties. Their safeties will come and fly downhill. Here's a little statistic for you, and we'll talk about this more when we get into the pass rush, Trevor. But Indiana's nickel this season came 44 times. Terry Jones came off the edge 44 times. Their other safety, Amari Farrell, came on pass rushes 23 times, and Sean Asbury, their other safety, came on a pressure 16 times. That's a lot of pressures, and some of those are obviously passing situations, but a lot of those, if you break down their film, they were in downs where it could have been a run or a pass. It was not I think they're passing, let's bring this guy. It was, this is our stunt, and it stops the run, and it stops the pass. If you want some context to that, Notre Dame's nickel, Jordan Clark, blitzed 9 times. Xavier Watts, one of their safeties, blitzed 13 times. Adon Schuler blitzed 13 times. So for context, all 3 of those aren't as much as their nickel came off the edge, because that's one of the things they do is they're going to overwhelm you with numbers in against the run. They're going to do it from all over, so you don't know who's coming, and they do a lot of funky stuff where they'll kind of bait you into something to try to get you to go somewhere, and they're going to stunt right into where they're trying to bait you to run. So they're going to say, I'm going to line up here, right? We see this in basketball all the time. Like you play a guy and you give him the outside, you give him the left hand because you're trying to bait him to go left, right? And then when he goes left, you've got some sort of trap set up for him. Like that's what Indiana does in football. And so that's a big thing too, is they're very well schemed, and they know who their players are. They know they don't have a bunch of first-round NFL draft picks. And so they scheme that way, and they're very smart, and they play fast. Like when the ball snapped, these kids are flying to the football. And I think those are some of the ingredients that make this run defense as good as it is.
And to build off that point, when they fly to the football, they're experienced enough to where those don't turn into mistakes. I think that's the biggest thing for me for Indiana's defense is typically when you combine flying downhill as fast as they do and the lack of top-level athleticism that they don't have, typically you find some mistakes in there. You know what I mean? Like you see guys being out of position. You see guys flying into the alley and just missing tackles. We've seen that on Notre Dame's defense at times. And they have very athletic people on their defense. That's the thing with Indiana, is their defense is very fundamentally sound. They don't make mistakes mentally or physically. You know, they don't miss a lot of tackles. They fly to the football. They get multiple hats to the football. They're not out of position that much, and that's a testament to good coaching and players taking good coaching. So what they lack in top-end athleticism, they make up for in a really good scheme, a lot of experienced players who are smart, and they've seen a lot of different looks from a lot of different offenses. You rattled off how many snaps this team has had, you know, and so I think all of that kind of plays into a factor. They've seen a lot of different situations. So, again, you know, it would be doing this defense a disservice to say, well, they haven't played anybody and they have a bunch of FCS power group of 5 guys, right? Albeit they do, but they're playing at a really, really high level, and you got to watch them to see it.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's a G5 All-Star team. Most of those guys in the G5 All-Star League go to the NFL. I mean, we saw a corner from Toledo last year get drafted, I think in the first or second.
Yeah, to the Eagles.
Right? Yeah. So, I mean, you see that type of stuff all the time, Trevor. There's kids from that level that go, and that's what they did. That's what they brought. I don't know that they have any first-round draft picks, but there's guys that are going to play in the NFL on this defense. There's no question about it. So, very smart team. You see in the chat, well, that means a lot of misdirections and counters. I mean, that stuff's going to be a part of what you do, no doubt. But they're not, like, this is what Trev was saying, they're not this really undisciplined team where they're going to bring these two pressures and then there's a vacated behind it. They do a good job of making sure that they don't have there's a lot of good gap integrity of what they're doing, because they're going to show you this junk look, but then they're going to move around to make sure that they're still have some gap integrity. You don't do what they've done without that, Trevor. I mean, that's the thing is they are a sound defense. We keep saying this. They're a sound defense, even though it looks junky. It's a sound defense because they understand who they are. There's no doubt. And look, you look at where they rank. There is something to that, though. I mean, they also rank 40th in college football in most runs allowed of over 30 yards. But here's the crazy thing. So they rank there, but they rank 7th, in runs of 20 yards or more. So it's like boom or bust. If they give up a gain, it's going to be it's going to be something that's like you're either going to rip one off, and that's where I think Notre Dame is going to has a chance to have some success. Trevor, is this Indiana team was number 1 in the country in runs allowed of 10 yards or more, only 26. They are 7th in the country in yard gains of 20 or more, so 7, and then they're 40th in yards of 30 or more. And so Notre Dame's going to, can Notre Dame, this key matchup is, can Notre Dame find ways to rip off big gains, especially early? That's going to be the key, because you're not going to nickel and dime this defense, this rush defense, to death. You're going to have to gash it.
Yeah.
There's going to be some -2s. There's going to be some +1s. There's going to be some 0s, but you got to hit it and that's where I think Notre Dame is a challenging matchup for Indiana, right? Because the concern I have is they have a really big physical nose in CJ West, and that type of player has given Notre Dame problems this year. We've seen it, right? We've seen it. They have a very stout physical edge combo in Linnell Card and Malik Kamara, which at times has given Notre Dame's 290-pound offensive tackle some problems. So there's some things that they do that match up, that present some matchup concerns for Notre Dame. There's also some things that Notre Dame does in the run game that present problems for them. Number one being Notre Dame's 2 base runs are inside zone and duo, which means they're coming right at you. There's a greater opportunity to gash that than there is when you're doing some of the slower, longer developing stuff. There was a run I saw against Ohio State, and I'm trying to remember who the back was, but it might have been Junkins, it might have been Henderson. I don't remember who it was, but I'm watching this play, and they're running sort of a run, and Indiana's doing that baiting you to run, off tackle thing, Trevor, where they're just lined up inside, like with really tight splits from Kamara, and they're basically daring Ohio State to run. And I'm looking at it now, he's in a 4-eye technique. They slant inside, and they try to get the linebackers over, and they get to those 2 backs, and I'm looking at this saying, like, it was Junkins. I'm sitting there looking at it saying, if that's Jeremiah Love, he bounces this and it's gone. Do you have the all 22 of that game? That I didn't send you okay. Did I send you the defense of that? Anyway,
I might just say,
it's a 1st and 10 play. It's earlier in the game. And if Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price is the running back, they're bouncing that thing outside the tackle and it might go. But Judkins is not that kind of back, and he just kind of hammers it right into the back of the right guard and gains like 5 yards and just goes down. And that's the thing that Notre Dame's going to have to find some ways to do, is if you can get a body on a body against this defense, there will be run lanes that come open. And what Notre Dame has that really none of the teams that they faced have with any kind of consistency is that kind of back that can really rip you up and rip off those big plays and really gash you in those instances. And they not only have one of them, they have 2 of them. And that's the difference. So if Ohio State does that when Travion's in the game, then he's got a shot to rip them off, right? He's got a shot to really turn it into a big one, which, as you mentioned, he did. When Quinshon Judkins is in the game and that happens, you don't have that same opportunity. And they only gave Travion Henderson 9 carries in that game, Trevor. I mean, and so, he's not going to have those opportunities as much to make those type of big plays. And as you mentioned, he had that 39-yard run that basically put the game away, but they didn't use him a whole lot in that game. And so those opportunities weren't there as much. Notre Dame, no matter who's carrying the football, has a guy that can rip off those big plays. That's the counter to what they do.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, I think that stat that you rattled off about, they're first in the country in yards of 10 or more, that you said they're fifth in the country in yards of 20 or more, and then 40th in, runs of 30 yards or more. And that right there, that stat, I think, encompasses what this defense is. They're really good from that 10 to 20 mark because they're very fundamentally sound. But once they have that back that is able to break into that next level, they don't have a Leonard Moore on their defense that can hawk somebody down. They don't have a Jaden Osbury that can hawk somebody down sideline to sideline. They don't have a Christian Gray, right? And so I think that to me, that stat right there speaks to they're really good when they keep stuff in front of them. The second something gets behind them, they're not catching them. And that's going to be the mismatch for IU, right? Is you're going to have to contain two of the most explosive running backs in all of college football with a defense that, they do really good at keeping in front of them. But Notre Dame's offense is really good at getting behind defenses. So, I mean, it's, again, you talked about the chess match yesterday, and they're going to have to do a really good job in scheming up some run plays to put them in those situations. Now, some of it is just going to be, Jeremiah Love hurdles a guy, Jadarian Price breaks 3 tackles, and then he sees a sliver and it's out the gate, right? So it will be a lot of that. But those stats are, I think, what speak the most to who this rush defense is. And that's not a knock. I mean, you're number one in the country in yards of 10 or more, that's crazy.
When you look at their tackling, according to Pro Football Focus, they have 110 missed tackles on the season. Notre Dame has 98. We think that Notre Dame's been a pretty good tackling team. That's about an average of 1 or more, right, per game than Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you consider the level of the competition, I think that that is an area where they can be, I think, taken advantage of by some better teams. Yeah. And they just haven't faced teams like that. And a lot of it, I mean, their linebackers, for example, whereas when you look at like Notre Dame's numbers, for example, their top 2 missed tackles guys are safeties. That's kind of what you expect because safeties are in space a lot more. Notre Dame has only 2 defenders that are in double digits in missed tackles. Don Schuler has 13 and Xavier Watts has 11. The next closest is Jaden Osbury at 7, who also plays in space a lot. And then after that, it's 6. If you look at Indiana's defense, they have 3 players in double digits, and their top guys is safety, but their next 2 guys are their inside linebackers who have 15 and 12 each. So I think those are areas where if they can get them in space, they can make those plays. Because I was having this, I think I shared this recently. I was having this conversation with a guy that covers Georgia Tech. He had me on the show the week before. He covers Georgia Tech and LSU. And it was a really fun interview, but we were talking after the game because he was talking about how just bad the tackling was. And I was like, hey, man, you might not want to be so hard on the Georgia Tech defense because that's kind of what everybody does. And I said, go ask Texas A&M and those athletes that they have what it's like tackling these kids in space. Like that's just – it's going to happen. You know what I mean? Your goal is to not let them get into the next level. And it's like, well, yeah, but you had that one safety for Georgia Tech that had Jadarian Price in the hole. And I was like, yeah, exactly. The next safety that brings Jadarian Price down in space in the hole with nobody else around him will be the first guy that brings Jadarian Price down in space with nobody around him. Like, it just doesn't happen, dude. That's like A&M couldn't do it. I mean, Louisville couldn't do it when they got in space. Even Northern Illinois, I mean, nobody could do it. Once they get in space, it's a wrap. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And that's what this group brings to the table. And that's something that Indiana has generally not faced at all this year. I think in my opinion, just looking at their opponents, Trevor, there's really only one running back that they faced all season that I believe is anywhere on the same level as what the Notre Dame running backs are from an explosiveness standpoint. And that guy, Travion Henderson, only carried the ball 9 times against them. Right? I mean, that's what they faced because they didn't face Jordan James. They didn't play Oregon. They didn't face Woody Marks. I mean, Jonah Coleman is not that type of back. He's probably the best running back they faced all year. And Jonah Coleman ran for 104 yards against them and 5.5 yards per carry against them. It's just the numbers overall look good because, I mean, they held Washington 116 yards rushing because they have an immobile quarterback that can't move, and they were able to shut it, and they had minus 24 rushing yards and other things like that. But when you look at it, Jonah Coleman went off in that game. I mean, he had 100 yards in that game, and he's not the dynamic playmaker that the Notre Dame running backs are, right? So that's the thing as I look at it and I say they haven't really faced the kind of running back, the kind of talent that Notre Dame has. Jonah went for 46 yards, had a 46-yard gain in that game. And that's without a quarterback that presents any kind of rushing threat at all. No, well, I shouldn't say that because they bring in the Damon Williams kid off the bench, and he'll just run kind of like – the Bo Perbula kid does, the
like Alex Orji does.
Yeah, the kid from Stanford that they bring in. Which I never understood. As athletic as Ashton Daniels is, why they bring in another quarterback to run? It's very odd. But that's the thing is they haven't faced a backfield like this. And every week we face some team whose opponents say, well, yeah, but they won't do that against our defense. And they do. And they need that to get going again in the postseason.
100%.
And we're going to find out if they're able to do that.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, the stigma that Notre Dame doesn't have any fast guys so far up to this season has worked into Notre Dame's favor. It's like, all right, yeah, you can think that. I mean, I think it was the Virginia game where you and I were up in the press box and you leaned over to me and you're like, why do teams keep trying to hurt Notre Dame to the perimeter? They just can't.
Yes.
They can't, and Riley Leonard talks all the time about, I just don't think defenses understand how fast I am. And he's not saying that to like brag about himself. He's just like, I just see people take angles at me and like they're just not. It's not the same angle that you would take to stop a Jeremiah Love. Right. Riley's not as fast as him, but it's still the same. Like this is a fast football team, man.
Right.
And I think that stigma of Notre Dame just kind of has like the size and the strength, but they lack in the speed.
Right.
That narrative's played in their favor this year, man, because teams are just not ready for it.
Well, it's on both sides of the ball. I mean, to your point, what I was referring to you, as you mentioned, was it was more of the Notre Dame defense because Virginia's trying to run these jet sweeps. And it's like, have you not been watching film? Did you not watch the Georgia Tech game when they tried to do this? And they got better athletes than you do for the most part at that stuff. And it just doesn't work. That stuff doesn't work against Notre Dame. You want to get outside of this defense, it's got to be a quick hitter. I mean, that's the only way you can get outside of the defense is those quick pitches where you suck everybody down and then you run that little quick pitch. A jet sweep is not getting outside of this defense. At least it hasn't all year to this point in time. I should probably not say that because then Indiana's going to go out and run a jet sweep for 50 yards. But it's true on both sides of the ball, and I think that's the thing that people don't realize is just how explosive the ball carries are for Notre Dame. But they're going to need their line to be at their best because this is the best defensive line this is the not only most productive, but most talented defensive line that they faced probably since Louisville. Yeah. I think their overall D-line is more talented than Georgia Tech. Zeke Biggers was a dude in that game. But the rest of their D-line didn't really impress me talent-wise. They're really well – they play hard. They're really well schemed. You probably have to go back to Louisville before you've played a defensive line with this kind of talent, in my opinion. So they're going to have to be on top of their game. They're going to have to be at their best against this. There's no doubt about that. Trev, next let's talk about the Notre Dame pass game.
Yeah.
And dive into what we see in this matchup, because this is the one that I think is the biggest concern for Notre Dame fans, rightfully so, about your ability to make a playoff run. And I think it starts against Indiana. This is a team in Indiana that you look at and say, boy, they are very good defending the run, as we see right there. But what can be maybe lost is the fact that they're also pretty good defending the pass. They rank 9th in the country in yards allowed per game, 3rd in yards allowed per attempt, 2nd in yards per completion. They rank 85th in completion percentage allowed. But when you see that number with the other two, it's because they give up a bunch of 2-3 yard completions and then they rally to the ball and tackle you. 10th in the country in most touchdowns allowed, 18th in interceptions. They rank 12th in pass efficiency defense, and they don't give up a lot of big plays. They rank 5th in fewest plays of 30 yards allowed for more, and they're pretty good pass rushers. They have 34 sacks in the season, which ranks 22nd nationally. Against the Notre Dame defense, it ranks 101st in passing yards per game, 71st in yards per attempt, 114th in yards per completion. and 30th and 38th in pass efficiency, which is solid. And that number, Riley Leonard in the last 7 games is around 159 in pass efficiency. It just kind of shows you how bad it was the first 5 games that they haven't been able to get it up to that close to that 159 number. But I think 150s is probably more reflective of what Indiana will face. Yeah, because they've been much better than that lately. And Notre Dame only has 8 pass plays all season of 30 yards or more, all season, which ranks 131st in college football. So you look at it and say, this is the thing. Indiana is going to commit a lot of resources to stopping the run, and they're going to basically say to Notre Dame, you're going to have to throw the ball to beat us. I think that will be the game plan that Indiana takes, Trev, and we'll talk about some of the things they do that make them good against the pass. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to talk big picture first. Notre Dame is not a team that has to go throw for 350 yards to win football games. I don't think they have to do that. No. But they're going to have to be a better throwing team against Indiana than they have against some of their opponents in recent games. Doesn't mean that they have to throw for 250, 275 yards. It just means early in the game, they're going to have success throwing the football, even if it's a play here or play there, to basically make Indiana pay for overplaying the run, and then 2, to force Indiana out of what they're trying to do, which is going to open up the run game. They're going to have to protect the run game more with the pass. It would not shock me if Mike Denbrock comes out early in this game looking to spread the field and find ways to get the pass game going and tell Indiana, hey, you think you're going to load the box all game today, I got something else for you. And it wouldn't shock me if he runs some stuff where he is in his 12 personnel and runs some play action shots or runs some screens and does some different things. You know what they're going to do, and you have to have a game plan for it. And this is the area where there's 2 areas. Well, let's just focus on that first before I jump into another thing, Trev. But that's a big thing. Is this part of the Notre Dame offense is going to have to outperform what it has done most of this season in order to take some of the pressure off of the run game.
Yeah, this is a part of the Notre Dame offense that kind of gives me a little hesitation when I think about predicting what this game is going to be and talking about Notre Dame's opportunity and their chance to go and make a playoff run, right? We reference the Ohio State-Indiana game a lot and talking about how, oh, man, Indiana was just outmanned. I use the Ohio State-Indiana game to also talk about the difference in where these teams are from a passing standpoint. We just got done talking about how Indiana did a really good job outside of that 137-yard run for Travion Henderson about bottling up their run game. Now, again, they haven't faced a rushing attack like Notre Dame's. I agree with that. I think we all do. But where Ohio State was able to thrive was their perimeter play from their receivers, right? But it's no mystery to me that Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate combined for 11 receptions, 148 yards, and a touchdown, right? The most receptions a Notre Dame receivers had all year in a game is 5. Egbuka went for 7 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. So this, to me, I think is the key to getting a solid victory in the playoffs. Do I think Notre Dame could just bang their heads against the wall and run it and rely on their athletes to make a play to, at least keep it close? Yeah, I do. But to your point, Brian, they're going to have to find some ability to push the ball vertically down the field. 38 passes of 30 yards or more is not great. Now, when I look at these stats, you look at the pass efficiency, and there is one point in time where Riley Leonard ranked 129th in college football in passing efficiency, and he's climbed that up to 38. So, some people might look at this in a vacuum and say 38th isn't great, but it's for the passing game especially, it's kind of more about the journey, of what they've came on. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Their ability to open up the pass game against Indiana, and it's not going to be easy. This is a really, really good passing defense. And, I'm not the biggest weather proponent of all time, but it is going to be 30 degrees. It is going to be 10 to 15 mile an hour winds. So, Notre Dame is going to have to find a way to be effective in the pass game, because it's no mystery what that defensive coordinator over at Indiana, their number one goal is going to be to stop 4, 24, and 13 with his legs. So they're going to have to find a way, hopefully all of these things that we've been hearing from Riley Leonard, I learned to live with no regrets and to just let it fly. And I feel like, this is the best I've been and most comfortable I felt passing the ball in my career. Hopefully all those things start to come to fruition, because I look at these numbers and I look at Indiana's numbers, and there is a big difference. You know what I mean?
I'm looking this up, Trev, and I'm going to calculate this here real quick because this is actually a let me see. Let me pass efficiency calculator for college. Let me just look this up here real quick because this is a very interesting statistic for Notre Dame. And when I put this in there, because I think it puts some context into what Riley Leonard has been. So if you start with the Louisville game, so really the last, and that's when he started to kind of show like, okay, he made a couple throws. You're like, okay, that's the Riley Leonard that we thought we were getting from Duke. But if you look at his numbers beginning with that game and put him out and kind of put him into context, I'm actually going to do this real quick and tell you what his passer rating was. In those games, he has had a passer rating of 157.3. So that's the last 8 games of the season. And if you look at that, again, that's not going to be like, oh, gosh, that puts him in the top 5 nationally in passer rating. But it does put him in the top 15. He would put him 13th. If the number he had the last 8 games throwing the football was what he did the entire year, he'd be 13th in college football, right ahead of Kevin Jennings. And that should kind of give you some context of the level of efficiency he's shown in the last 8 games. Now, he has not been a big play guy. He hasn't been a guy that's out there, just ripping people up. It hasn't been, where it's just, oh my gosh, did you see the 280-yard performance he had? I will say this: I do think his yards per game number is a little bit misleading. He has been 67.9% completion rate since then. There have been some games, Trevor, as we've talked about, where Riley Leonard went out there and ripped the team up pretty good in the first half and then didn't do anything after that. The Stanford game, he was on pace for 280 yards. The Purdue game, he was on pace for about 224 yards, and he didn't play in the second half. There was another game, Navy game, where he was on pace for well over 300 yards. And they kind of called off the dogs. He didn't play a whole lot. So there's been plenty of games where he was on pace. I mean, if he doesn't have that 78-yard touchdown pass from, to Jaden Harrison called back against Virginia. So there's been some things that have kept the numbers down, mainly just not playing in a lot of second halves of a lot of games that keep the numbers down. But I think that level of efficiency shows they're going to need him to be that, though, because there's been a couple times late in the year where Riley was just like he was not sharp against Florida State. He wasn't. He wasn't super sharp early against Virginia. He got better as the game went on, but early in that game, he was missing some easy reads and missing some opportunities. He can't be that. But I'll say this, Trevor, when you look at this offense, I wrote an article today, and it's a message board only article. I didn't publish it publicly. I just wanted to do some things. I'm going to start doing some more things that are for the message board only. And I broke down the pass game. I said, here's the thing about the pass game. Outside of Chris Mitchell, so Chris Mitchell's a different entity right now. If you look at the Bo Collins, the Jordan Faisons, the Greathouse, and Jaden Thomas and Jordan Faison, they don't need any of those guys to play above what they have already shown. They don't need any of them to like, hey, I need you to be the best version of yourself. I need you to play at a level that you've never played before because it's money time. My point in the article is this, Trevor, is if they simply just do what we have seen them do this season when they are at their, not even their best, like best game ever, but just when you're doing what we know you're capable of doing, then, hey, look, they're pretty good. And I'll give you an example. Bo Collins, the last 4 games has been terrible. I mean, just drop passes, not getting open. And you look at his numbers in the last 4 games, they're averaging 5.7 yards per target of Bo Collins, only 11.3 yards per completion, and they've only completed 50% of their throws at Bo Collins. Why? Because he's got like 4 drops in that period of time. But if you look at the first 8 games, they completed 66.7% of their throws to Bo Collins. He was at 8.5 yards per target and 12.8 yards per completion. All I'm asking Bo Collins to do is be who you were the first 8 games of the year. That's it. I'm not asking you to play above your potential. With Jaden Greathouse, it's like, hey, maybe just throw to him more. Right. Because he's been really good.
Right.
Like they're targeting. Here's a crazy number. So the number 1 and number 2 receivers on the roster in what is the completion percentage for the quarterback when those guys are targeted? It's Jaden Harrison's number 1 and Jaden Greathouse is number 2. And on the season, Greathouse and Harrison have combined for 43 catches on 55 targets for 564 yards. That's 10.3 yards per target and 13.1 yards per catch. They just don't target them a whole lot. And so, like, maybe target them a little bit more. Jordan Faison, he's shown some flashes, but he's been banged up all year. They don't need Jordan Faison to be the best version of himself, that he's never seen before, play to his full 5-star potential type of thing. It's just be what you were against Army. Be what you were against Navy. Be what you were last year. It's not even about guys got to play out of their minds or play above their potential. They don't need that. Just be what we've seen you be this season for stretches, not just a game, right? Like, it's not like Bo Collins had a game early in the year and that's kind of padded his whole statistics. It's just be the guy you were. 4 catches for 55 yards. That's all I need you to do. Move the chains. Jaden Greathouse, maybe target him a little bit more, because when you do, he's pretty money. When you target Jaden Harrison, he's pretty money. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that they need. And that's the thing for Riley Leonard is he just needs to be not what he was that best game he's ever played scenario, but dude, just be what you were for on average the last 7-8 games. Right? That's it. You don't got to hit 15 bombs and just get the ball where it's supposed to get to. Give your guys a chance to go make plays. He's done more of that down the stretch, and if he can do that against Indiana, I think he'll have some success, because as good as this pass defense is, Trevor, they thrive defensively because of in the pass game, because of a lot of things that they do offensively. And so we'll kind of give you some examples of what we're talking about here. Like, they're a really well-coached team that really kind of messes with you. So, like, this is a front that Indiana will show. This is their 4-2-5 alignment. Sometimes that nickel guy will be a slot guy, Terry Jones. Sometimes it's a linebacker. But they'll line up like this, and they'll do 5 or 6 things out of this, and a little bit more. This is a basic look of a 2-high look where they will simply just play cover 2, a sort of a physical cover 2. The outside corners will squat on the ball. Right now, they're trying to bait you as a quarterback into thinking, I have that hitch, I have the quick out cut to the field, I have the little now screen to the bottom, and then all of a sudden they fly downhill and they kind of eat it up. This looks like, cover 2, cover 4 quarters look, and they'll show that at times. But in other times, they'll roll. In this instance, they will roll to a lot of field cover 3. So they'll roll to, I think that's the sky, like 3 sky, right? 3 cloud is when you roll weak. 3 sky is when you roll strong. And so the corner comes down, the safety plays over the top, the backside safety will drop to the middle of the field, and then that guy will go off, he'll play off, and then you'll have that will linebacker, sometimes the defensive end, Mikael Kamar, will drop into coverage underneath that little hitch, that little out cut, and they're trying to bait you into things and show you something different. Out of this same exact look, they'll play kind of a cover quarters. Sometimes it looks almost like a soft 2, but it's more of a quarters coverage, Trevor. But again, they're really good at slow pedaling because they play so far off the ball. They'll slow pedal so they can still drive on the quick game. And that's why they'll give up a lot of, low yards per carry type of things, because you'll see them, throw a little 3-yard, 4-yard out cut here, and that slow pedal allows their corners to drive on the football, and you complete the ball, but you only gain 4 yards. And those are the things that they'll do defensively. They'll play a little bit of man. This is an instance where they will bring this corner blitz or this nickel blitz, and they'll bring that guy down. They'll bring the boundary safety down as well and rob him into the weak side alley, roll that front side safety to the middle, drop that nickel will kind of play like a hook curl type of zone, and the corner will play off. They'll do that as well. They do a lot of different things out of these looks, Trevor, and it's the same look every time. Now, that was not the same look 5-6 different times. That was literally just one play that I showed you things they'll do out of that one look. It wasn't like, wow, those 6 looks looked identical. No, that was one play. I just was using an example of the different things that they'll do with that look. And that's the thing that I like, Trevor, is if you're evaluating it, it doesn't look complex. It doesn't look crazy. All that stuff is post-snap. And that's what can make them a little bit challenging. Now, there will be some things they'll do in their fronts where they'll reduce their fronts, play kind of like an eagle, things like that. But this is, for the pass game, this is the thing that makes it a little bit challenging, right? Is they will line up. And so Riley Leonard's going to have a good beat on it. Now, here's where I think Notre Dame has an advantage. Well, actually, do you want to add anything to that, Trev, before I kind of move on to the next part of it? Just kind of add to that. This also allows their defensive players to not have too much on their plate because they don't have to know a million different coverages and things like that.
Yeah, I think the term when coaches say we need to do a better job of putting our players in a position to be successful, I think a lot of people kind of gloss that over and don't really know the context behind that. And that breakdown that you just showed is that like them doing those things and like disguising different looks and disguising coverages post snap. That is a coach putting their players in a position to do well, because it's not like Notre Dame's defense that it can just be, to your point, see ball, get ball. They have to do things schematically, like coaches on the sideline. You go back and watch Indiana's games, are going crazy, pointing things out to different players, getting people to roll their coverages and do all of those things. So, I think that that's the major threat that they pose, is because you could be getting potentially 4 to 5 different things out of the same base look. And obviously you and I both know this from playing the position, but you sit back and you look at pre-snap reads first. Like that's kind of the first indicator that you have. And then you kind of build and go from there. And that's what makes that challenging, is because it could be 4 to 5, maybe even 6 different things, depending on how they line up. But to your point, I know you're about to break it down. There are things that leave that potentially a little vulnerable, and things that Notre Dame could and should take advantage of on Friday.
So Trev, when you look at kind of what they do, also they do bring a lot of second and third level pressures. And this is when I talk about it, I say pressures. I don't mean blitzes. Now, some people view this as the same thing terminology wise. I don't. I think a blitz is more of a third down passing situation, overload type of thing. That's not really what Indiana. I mean, they will do that on third down, no doubt. What I'm more referring to is more of a stunt, a 5 to 6 man stunt, a lot of 5-man stunts that are geared towards really getting after the run game as much as it is about getting after the pass game. And that's something that when you look at, they are pretty good at, in my opinion, of attacking in that way, especially with their second level players. As I mentioned, the number of pressures they have from their nickels and things along those lines. And here's an example that I want to break down of something that they'll do. It's not a super complex stunt, but they're really good at it. That is meant to attack the throwing game, get after the quarterback, and stop the run. And it's this pressure right here. Let me pull it up. So this is a look that Indiana gave. This is against Maryland. This is an early down play. They're in 11 personnel, 2 receivers, as you can see, sort of in a wide bunch down to the bottom. You got a normal tight end and then a boundary receiver split up there. And you see Indiana playing a little bit of their base 4-2-5 type of look, right? That's their nickel in the game. So that's the shell of it. And then I'm going to show you kind of what they do from here. So this is the pressure that they brought. So it looks like a sort of a base look against, like I said, an early down situation. They line up like this. You can see that they've got a nose, a straight up nose, which is interesting because they look like they're in an even underfront, but they've got a head up nose, right? It's a little bit of a different wrinkle. You've got 2 wide techniques from your defensive ends. You've got a wide 5 and a wide 9, an even wider 9 technique by number 6. Number 41 there is in a wide 5 technique. And then you have your tackle who's, I mean, I part of me wants to say he's in a 3 technique because his outside shoulder is on the foot of that, but that's even close. I mean, you could say that's a 4-eye, where technically you could say, I think he actually is lined up inside shoulder of the tackle, right? So it's a little bit of an odd looking front, not an odd front, but an odd looking front. And so out of this, they're bring their nickel from depth, but they'll slant that field side end hard inside of the tackle. The linebacker on this particular blitz looked like he was crashing B gap, gets that guard to pass it open, and then quickly jab steps and works inside in the A gap. And a lot of guards aren't athletic enough to handle him. They slant that nose tackle really hard across the guard's face. Their end goes really hard across the tackle's face. It's a 5-man pressure, and then that will linebacker will just kind of slide into the middle. And then if it's run, number 6 crashes off the edge. If it's pass, he drops underneath the hook curl. This may not look like anything complicated. It's not complicated, but it's something they do that presents a lot of problems because they will do other things out of this. They will slant that defensive end inside and bring number 4 right off his behind to the outside with the nickel. They'll do things where they'll slant the nose tackle out and they'll bring, so like this guy right here. Okay, so they'll take this guy right here, slant him here, and then they'll bring this guy in a hard twist there, and then crash that guy right behind him, this guy right behind him. They do a lot of different things like that that force offensive linemen to react quickly. And the thing about it is, Trevor, is they hit these things aggressively. So they're not working for width, they're working vertically. So as they're looping up in those directions, they're working vertically, and they're trying to get your line back, and then they bring those linebacker pressures, they bring those loops, they bring those twists aggressively, and they have very good gap sound play here, right? And that's the thing that they'll do. They do a lot of stuff like this that puts you in a bit of a bind offensively, that if you don't pick that up, you're going to be in trouble. And the reality is that type of stuff are things Notre Dame has not done a good job against this season. That's where again, Joe Rudolph is going to have to be on top of his game and getting these guys prepared to handle that stuff, because they've not handled that stuff very well this season. You know, even the USC game, I thought they did a better job against the run against that, but not against the pass. And we talked about that play where Jaden Harrison is wide open, might score, might be a 50-yard touchdown if Riley Leonard has a second and a half more time to throw. They just ran a simple inside twist. Guard comes around, or the tackle comes around. Nobody picks him up. Boom, he gets in the quarterback's face. And, you know, there you go. So, man, that's the kind of stuff you have to have a plan for. And they're good with finding ways when to bring it. They'll find what looks they can show where you have some protection looks and some run game looks against it. And that's what you have to be prepared for. You have to stop. They're not going to just play straight up all game. They know they're going to get beat, right? That's what I said earlier. He knows who they have. They have good football players. They don't have elite football players. He has to do this kind of stuff for his guys to be as productive as they are, and they do it really well.
Yeah, one thing that they did a lot over against Ohio State, which I use is the best comp to Notre Dame's offensive line from like a skill set perspective out of the teams that they played, in my opinion. And so what they did a lot with them is there was a lot of pre-snap shifts from the defensive line to where, you know, one thing is their entire defensive line would say, like, if they all shift to the left, right? And it's that look that you're talking about where they just leave the tight end completely uncovered. More times than not, that nickel back, or they'll shift one of the outside linebackers out in space to where it looks like he's there covering. What they'll do is they'll send that outside backer, that nickel, and roll the safety down to fill. And then off of that same play, what they did is they had the 3 D linemen at the end. So from nose tackle, defensive tackle, and their right side defensive end, Linnell Carter, they'll slant them in, and then they'll loop Kamara around up into the A gap, which is where he's blown up a couple run plays. So it just goes to further your point that they do a lot of different things out of the same look that when teams aren't prepared for it, and if teams, you know, like Notre Dame have a history of not really picking up stunts and twists that well, it poses a big, big problem. So it's going to be interesting to see what Joe Rudolph does with his offensive line group, you know, over the last couple of weeks.
Trev, here's where I think there was an interesting conversation on the board yesterday. And it was, does either team have an advantage by having more time to prepare? And somebody had said they both have the same amount of time to prepare. It's a wash. I pushed back on that a little bit, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I'm going to share it here in this chat as well. I don't think that all time off is equal for a host of reasons, but I'm going to get specific about one. One is, hey, look, you're playing well. You don't want to stop playing. If you're on fire, you want to keep playing. You don't want to take 3 weeks off. You don't want to lose that moment. You don't want to get out of your rhythm. You want to get it. You don't want to get out of your routine. You want to just keep playing, right? And we have seen that before where teams just finish the season on a high note back in the day when you'd have to wait a month to play a BCS game, or you'd have to wait a month to play a playoff game or whatever. Teams would kind of lose a lot of that momentum. Sometimes that would be the case. And here's why I think in this case, in this particular matchup, it's advantage Notre Dame for that extra time off. Part of what has made Indiana successful this season is they have talent, right? We have said before, this is a team with talent, but they're not Notre Dame level talent. They're not Ohio State level talent. They're not Texas and Georgia and Alabama and teams like that level talent. They're incredibly well coached. And because they have so many kids that have run this system before, as we mentioned, half of their starters on offense and defense, I think it's about half, are guys from JMU, slightly under half. Guys from JMU or very experienced players. We talked about it yesterday. There's guys with over 3,000 career snaps, 2,000 career snaps. Almost their entire starting lineup is over 1,500 career snaps. Notre Dame doesn't have a whole lot of guys over 1,500 career snaps. You know what I mean? Like, that's a small list of guys for Notre Dame. It's like Howard Cross, Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, Jack Kaiser, and, Jordan Clark, Rod Hurd, and Riley Leonard. You know what I mean? Like, none of their offensive linemen are there. You know what I mean? Jeremiah Love's not there. Maybe Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell, but all that was done in a different system. What helps them during the year is the players are so good within that system, and they know the system. They can do all these things, and all you have is really 3 practices to prepare for it. That's it. To prepare for all the different things, you only have 3 practices really to scheme for it. The fact that Notre Dame had, and I know they gave the players the week off. Guys, they did not give the analysts and the coaches that week off. They were breaking down film of potential teams, and there was a lot of there was no team Notre Dame was projected to play more in the first round than Indiana. And so, like, even that week after the regular season, I promise you there was advanced scouting being done of Indiana. And then once that announcement was made, Notre Dame had that additional 2 weeks to then zero in on playing Indiana. Sure. I think that's where Notre Dame can kind of have an advantage. They can have that additional time to not throw more stuff at them, but to better scout what they do and what their tendencies are, so you can have plans to go at them. What are their weaknesses? What are their soft spots? And why that gives Notre Dame a greater advantage than it does Indiana, because Indiana also has that kind of time to do that, is because for Indiana, it's about, you don't necessarily have to plan for what's our plan for stopping this guy who's better than all of our dudes. It's they do some stuff that's different, that's interesting. We haven't seen a ton. Let's have some extra time preparing for it and have a plan for it. Where for Indiana, there's really no game plan for saying, okay, we know what they're going to do with Jeremiah Love and Jarian Price, so we'll shut it down schematically, because this is more about their dudes are better than your dudes. And that's why I think that Notre Dame has the advantage, because if the scheme gets neutralized and it becomes about who's got the better players, it's advantage Notre Dame. If it's a situation where it's like, okay, you're having trouble with their schemes, that's advantage Indiana. And I think the extra time should, doesn't mean it's going to, should give Notre Dame a bit of an advantage. And I think that's especially true in the pass game, where they're going to have more time to study who are the players that you can go after, what are the matchups that we can do. You can spend more time scouting them, breaking down their third down film, breaking down their 11 personnel defensive film, breaking down their matchup film. Hey, I want every single film of when number 4 drops into coverage or is in man coverage or has to defend a linebacker or tight end. You can get that film because of how much extra time you have, and you can study that more and have some ways, okay, now we can do these type of things. That's why I think the extra time should give Notre Dame an advantage, on top of Jordan Faison gets rest. Riley Leonard gets some rest. Mitchell Evans gets some rest. Some of those guys that were banged up, not 100%, they now got time off. Billy Schrouth gets a little bit more rest. And I think that's where I do believe that the extra time off, but it's not too much time off. It's just 3 weeks, could potentially give Notre Dame a little bit of a preparation advantage if they're able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think agree with everything that you said. I don't have much more to add there. The one aspect that I do look at it too is how each of those teams' final games of the regular season played out. I think you can go back and look at Notre Dame's schedule, and the 4 biggest games for them this season from a takeaway standpoint. Yes, obviously Texas A&M, Louisville is where they kind of turned everything around, and that's when things started clicking. But the 2 other ones for me, I would make the argument, is Northern Illinois and USC. And I'm happy that Notre Dame closed out the way that they did against USC. Yes, they won. They won by double digits, handed them their biggest loss. But there were also some flaws that needed corrected in that game, which I think just naturally, and this isn't me saying that Indiana is just hanging their hat on, well, they beat Purdue by 66, so they don't have to prepare. But I do think that it's natural to feel better coming off, we just rolled our in-state rival by 66 points. So now it's time to get into bowl prep. You're feeling good about it. Also, you have to factor in who their head coach is, a very cocky, very arrogant person, which is a good thing to lead a program like Indiana's. And then on the other side, you have a Notre Dame team who just went on a 10-game win streak. They rolled everybody that they played, but there was a lot of correctable mistakes that they need to make from USC to when they host Indiana. And so, yes, it's the same amount of time, but I think that also adds more to the substance of what that time is bringing. You know what I mean? Like Notre Dame's last game out was a tough, grinded out win against a rival. Indiana absolutely blew out Purdue at home. So it just makes some of those mistakes a little bit easier to identify if you're Notre Dame, opposed to the opposite. Now, Kurt Cignetti and his staffer is a really great coaching staff. I know they're not just saying, well, we beat Purdue, so we got Notre Dame in the bag, but I do think from the Notre Dame lens, I think those mistakes that were made against USC are a little bit more glaring than, IU having to go back a couple more weeks, or an additional week to the Ohio State game. So I think when you talk about the time off and all the planning, I think that plays a factor into it as well.
It's going to be, what I love about games like this, Trevor, is this is when the coach in me comes out. I love when I'm breaking down film of two teams and you're just like, good Lord, these guys are well coached. And there's been games in the past where you felt like Notre Dame had the better talent, but you knew they're going to win because they had better players, but you were worried that it'd be closer than it should have been because they just weren't coached really well. And there's other times when you just watch the other team and they're really talented, but it won't matter against Notre Dame because Notre Dame's coached really well and they're not. What I love about this matchup, Trevor, to be completely honest with you, is I love the fact that these two teams are both so well coached and they're so well prepared. I think you'll see that which one can do the best job. It's going to be a great, great chess match, and I can't wait to see it. We're going to do one more part here, Trev, of this breakdown, and that's going to be looking at it from the standpoint of just the overall offense versus defense. And we'll just kind of quickly dive into this. As we've shown you these numbers before, Notre Dame ranks third in total offense, scoring offense. Indiana ranks sixth in scoring defense. If you took out Notre Dame's defensive scores, they would rank, I think, what do we say, Trev, like 12th or 13th in scoring offense?
Yes. Because it'd be like 34, 36.
It was 36. I think it's like 36 point something. They would still rank. But you also have to think about how many they had 10 missed field goals this season. So those things kind of balance. They're a very good scoring offense. They only rank 40th in the country in scoring and total yards. This is a comment that kind of the Indiana fan who's in the chat having some fun and just being fine to consider. There's a difference between yards and effectiveness. Notre Dame ranks 40th in yards, partly because they have a lot of short fields this season because of the fact that they're the number one team in the country at forcing turnover. So the Louisville game was brought up in the chat. Well, when you get the ball at the 4-yard line, it's hard to put up a lot of yards when you score a touchdown, right? When you get the ball at midfield because you forced a fumble at midfield and you go down and score a touchdown, you're not going to have a lot of yards because you can only go 50 at that time. And that's something that the defense, that the fact that they do rank number one in the country in forced turnovers, a lot of those have given them short fields. And so those are things that you saw from Notre Dame in this game. Is Notre Dame's first touchdown drive went 75 yards on their first drive of the game. Their next touchdown drive on their very next possession, they only went 53 yards because they got the ball at midfield. Their very next possession, they only went 4 yards to get a touchdown. And those are things you look at, Trevor, and say, hey, look, your yards are going to be down, which is why we focus so much on yards per play. And this is what we said earlier about when you look at Indiana's rush defense. Well, you could say, well, they're ahead a lot, and so teams don't run on them. Cool, that's fine. But they're number 3 in yards. There's also number 2 in yards allowed per rush. That tells you they're elite. And same thing here with Notre Dame. You rank 3rd in scoring. You rank 8th in yards per play. You're an elite offense from a scoring standpoint. Now, they're not always elite in a effectiveness in how they look standpoint, and that's what's going to be key about this game. And a big part of that is going to be that third to last number, Trevor. Notre Dame ranks 87th in college football in third down offense. Indiana ranks 8th in the country in third down defense. That is going to be a huge, huge part of this game. The more times that Notre Dame can convert third downs, the more times that they can extend drives, the greater opportunity that they are going to get for that next big play. It's hard to have big plays when you're limited on possessions and on snaps because you're going 3 and out, 4 and out, things like that. They've got to be able to move the chains effectively on third down when they get there. That is going to be huge. A big part of Indiana's success is they're great on third down. Great on third down. And a big part of Notre Dame's struggles on offense when they've had them have been because they're not good on third down and they have to rely on the big plays. That's going to be a big part of this. I mean, they only allowed one opponent all season to go over 40% on third down, and that was Nebraska, a game they won 56-7. Michigan was at 33%, 5 of 15. Ohio State was only 4 of 11, 36.4%. You want to know why Ohio State can struggle to consistently move the ball? It's that right there. They couldn't move the chains on third down. Notre Dame's going to have to find a way to move the ball on third down. And then another one, Trevor, is the one right above it, red zone touchdowns. That's the one vulnerability that Indiana's had all year, is when teams get in the red zone, they get touchdowns. And that's going to be a key component to this game as well.
You know, when I go through and I look at third down percentage, I always love providing the context, and I've done this all year. There's a lot of people that just look at third down conversions and don't fully understand what all goes into it. And you need to stay ahead of the sticks. Have to stay ahead of the sticks, because I cannot tell you how many times I've watched Notre Dame pick up 6 yards on first down, nullified by a holding penalty. Now they're staring down the barrel at 1st and 20. You know, I watched them get an 8-yard gain on second down, 15-yard hands to the face penalty. Now you're looking at 2nd and 17. You get a 10-yard gain on second down and still be at 3rd and long. So Notre Dame's going to have to do a really good job of staying on schedule and staying ahead of the sticks. And that goes back into the conversation that we always have about Notre Dame being a very rhythm-based offense. And I think that third down statistic shows that, right? Because more context, they are also the last ranked team in college football in third downs attempted. So when this offense is humming, they're humming, right?
Right.
But the second they get knocked off schedule, you know what I'm saying? That's when it gets a little faltered. And to be fair, there's not a lot of teams in college football that are actively converting first downs from 2nd and 17 and from 1st and 20, right? So got to stay ahead of the sticks. And you said it best. When you get to the red zone, touchdowns is the number one priority, especially factoring in the kicking problems that you have had over the last couple seasons. But third down is going to be huge. It's been inconsistent, bad for the most part of the season. Against Virginia, they went 1 of 12 on third down. Against Army, they went 3 for 5. And then against USC, they went 3 for 9.
Yep.
And it's no mystery that we look at the Army game and say, man, Notre Dame was clicking on all cylinders on offense. And we look at the Virginia game and the USC game and man, there was a lot of missed opportunities out there.
Yep.
I believe that there's a direct correlation, because you have to be able to keep drives alive. I said it earlier in the show. IU has depth at receivers. Notre Dame does not have depth in the quarterback room. So you need to do everything that you can to give your defense as much rest as possible. And they can't be going out and going on these, minute 10-second drives where it's 3 and out because they get a bad penalty and the defense is right back out there.
You can go 3 and out if it results in Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price going 50.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you live with that one.
Hey.
You mentioned penalties, Trevor, and we so rarely talk about this in these type of breakdowns, but that's a very interesting statistic as well. Because if you look at Indiana, they rank 29th in the country on their team in penalty yards lost. Notre Dame ranks 80th. They rank 16th in most penalties against them. Notre Dame ranks 65th. That is a very, very interesting statistic. And that is something worth watching when you talk about this game, Trevor, is that right there, is those yards lost, those opportunities lost because you are penalized as much as you are. Now, the interesting thing is Indiana's opponents weren't penalized very much either this season, and Notre Dame's weren't a ton either, but Notre Dame was penalized a lot more this season than Indiana. And that'll be an interesting aspect to watch. Because like you said, you can't get in 3rd and 2 and then somebody false starts and now you're in 3rd and 7 against one of the best third down defenses in college football. Can't do it. You can't make those kind of mistakes. And we've seen Notre Dame make that too many times.
Yep.
Too many times. And that's the kind of stuff you're going to have to avoid in this type of matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. It all comes down to execution. And I think that, I am a big believer, and I've told this to some of my friends too. I think that false starts are one of the most unexcusable penalties.
Oh, they're so frustrating.
Because it's just like, the snap count is also coming from an offensive guy, but it's just, the snap count, especially if Notre Dame's playing at home. Home false start penalties are just, it can't happen. You can't put your team behind the sticks.
Home starting a game, coming out of a break, getting a
Yep.
delay or a false start are literally the most annoying, frustrating, pull your hair out penalties that a team can commit. And we've seen too many of that from Notre Dame over the
Too many.
years, even this year. And they're going to have to be prepared for that. So a very interesting part to look at of the breakdown. Trev, the final part of this one is we're going to have a little bit of fun with this one, right? So we gave you the analysis. We broke it all down. We told you all the things that Notre Dame needs to do and what Indiana is. And I hope you guys enjoyed that breakdown. This last part, Trev, we're going to talk about game wreckers. And we're going to talk about why they're important. That's analysis. And then after that, we're going to have some fun. And we're going to predict who we think the game wreckers are going to be for Notre Dame on offense in this game. So we'll give you why it's important. We'll talk about some potential Indiana game wreckers that you have to have a plan for. And then we'll have our fun with our predictions of who we think the game wreckers are going to be. And what are game wreckers, right? Those are guys that make the big money plays in big games, right? Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, game wreckers. I mean, it's you think you got it bottled up. It's like we've watched games this year where Jadarian's like -2, +1, +0, -4, 60. I mean, like that. It's like, dude, you think it's like, oh, Jadarian's not having a good game today, and then boom, he goes for 6. Jeremiah is very similar in that regard, although I think Jeremiah is the more efficient of the two. Riley Leonard is the kind of guy that doesn't look like he's having a big game, and then all of a sudden he makes 2 guys miss in the backfield, takes off running, and boom, he's got 40. You've got those guys on offense. You've got those guys on defense. Riley Mills just completely taking over a couple games the second half of the year. Xavier Watts has been a game wrecker this season. Leonard Moore and Christian Gray have had their moments where they have shown some game wrecker ability. You've got those type of guys can take over a game and either dominate for 60 minutes or dominate the big keys. I always said Khalid Kareem. I've said this before. I said it, I think, last week, why Khalid Kareem was one of my favorite players ever at Notre Dame as far as defensive linemen is because Khalid Kareem was one of the most clutch defensive linemen Notre Dame's ever had. If you needed a stop, if you needed a sack in a key moment of a big game, you just kind of felt like, don't worry, Khalid at some point in time in this game is going to step up and make a play. That's just kind of how I felt he always was as a player. That's a game wrecker. Or you'd have, and whereas Julian Aguara wasn't necessarily that, but Julian was always like a 3-sack game waiting to happen. There's different ways to be game wreckers. And that's what they need to have. And a big part of winning a game like this between 2 outstanding football teams is whose game wreckers step up and have the best performance. That's the big key because, hey, the coaching is both really good. The talent's really good. The scheme is going to be good. Who steps up and says, on this 3rd and 5, this ball is mine. I don't care that you have it defended well. I don't care that you're in a good position. For like Bo Collins against Texas A&M, Jaden Greathouse runs that good route, gets open on 3rd down. But then the play that really got that drive going was Will Lee was in good position against Bo Collins, but Riley put it where it needed to be, and Bo made a great catch. Didn't matter how good the coverage was, Bo was making that play. And that really sparked that game-winning drive for Notre Dame against them. Those are the things you look at. I mean, you think of, Louisville, Notre Dame's beating Louisville by double digits most of the game. Louisville scores late in the 4th quarter to make it a 7-point game. And what does Notre Dame do? Bomb to Jaden Harrison, screen to Jeremiah Love, touchdown, ball game. Right? Like game wreckers. And those are the things you need. Teams driving, and you think they're about to make a big play, and then boom, Xavier Watts picks you off. Christian Gray picks you off. Like, you think of the we talked about this. The moment where I felt Notre Dame's season turned around was 7-7 ball game. Louisville's backed up inside their own 5 because of a great forced fumble by Drake Bowen. And Notre Dame has a big mistake on defense. Kingston overplays a read zone, and Tyler Shuck pulls it, and he's out the gate. At first, I thought he was going to score. Then I was like, okay, Xavier's got him. Xavier had an angle. He's going to tackle him around midfield. And out of nowhere, Leonard Moore comes up behind him and knocks the ball out. Game wrecker. What happens? Instead of Louisville going down and scoring again, and Notre Dame is just shook. They hadn't played well the week before. You talk about how they were playing that game, and then the offense responds and goes down and scores a touchdown, and all of a sudden that game was never quite the same, Trevor. Louisville was never really in the game again after that. And how did they score? Okay, right? 2nd and 6, 2nd and 7. You have Jadarian Price ripping off he bounces it out to the left, 16-yard gain, right? Gets him into scoring zone 2 plays later. Riley Leonard finds Jaden Greathouse open for a big play, 34-yard touchdown, and Notre Dame never trailed again rest of the game. Game wreckers, right? And that's what you need, and that's what you have to prevent from happening with the other team. So that's what a game wrecker is. And when you look at Indiana, you can't let Elijah Surratt be a game wrecker on offense. You can't let Curtis Rourke wreck you by having time to throw the football all game. On the other side of the ball, you can't let Mikhail Kamara wreck you with this pass rush. You can't let CJ West control the middle line of scrimmage the way that you allowed Zeke Biggers to do against Georgia Tech, right? And you can't allow their secondary to make big plays in the pass game to get them the ball. That's the game wreckers for Indiana you got to be careful about. Notre Dame needs game wreckers to step up if they're going to not only win, but win in a way to where you feel like they're building some momentum for a run. At the end of the day, winning by 1 is all that matters. But we've also said we are believers in momentum and playing in a way where you feel like, hey, we're rolling right now. Game wreckers have to step up. So what we're going to do, Travis, we're going to have some fun with this last section. We're going to predict game wreckers on both sides of the ball. You're going to pick 2. I'm going to pick 2. We're going to talk about why we're predicting that, and then what that would mean for Notre Dame. We'll do that on both sides of the ball and have some fun with it. So did I miss anything in that game wreckers conversation, Trevor, about why it's such an important part of it, especially in this magnitude of a game?
No, man, I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly, and I'm going to reference it again, and I'm going to continue to do so. Look at championship weekend. Look at who went and balled out for their teams. It was their dudes. I've said it before. Game wreckers, simply put, your dudes got to go be dudes.
Yep.
Yes, it's nice to have those unsung heroes that kind of come up and, the Hunter Renfros of the world, the O.J. Howards of the world. You need both. But at the end of the day, that's not set up unless Mike Williams goes for over 100 yards receiving in the national championship. Right? You go through and you look at the Georgia-Texas game, and Texas's number 1 wide receiver, Matt Golden. Their number 1 overall receiver is their tight end, but Matt Golden went for 8 for $162. Trevor Etienne for Georgia went for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. You look at Kevin Jennings.
He had a dude in the second half of that game, dude.
Yes. You go through and you look at Kevin Jennings had 339 total yards of offense and 4 total touchdowns against Clemson. Cade Klubnik's their dude. He had 262 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, no turnovers. You look at what the 2 running backs did from Penn State and what Tyler Warren did.
Yep.
It's no mystery to me that Oregon, Dylan Gabriel balled out, and then so did Tez Johnson. Duh. You know what I'm saying? So, that's why I love – sorry. That's why I love in the playoffs and in big game moments, big players, dudes will go out and be dudes, and that's what's going to be fun to watch about this game, man.
When we talk about Indiana, I mean, the one game they lost, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you had some of your dudes stepping up and making big plays, right? I mean, you think of the big catch, the touchdown catch that Emeka had. You think of the big run that Travion Henderson had. You think of Caleb Downs going out and returning that punt for a touchdown, and breaking that game completely open. I mean, those are the things you talk about, Trev. I mean, what was the score? It was 14-7, right?
Yeah.
And what happens, right? Coming out of the second half, Ohio State forces a 3-and-out, and boom. 79-yard punt return, in Indiana was never in the game again after that. Just those are the things you look at and say you got to make those plays. I mean, Cody Simon was a game wrecker for Ohio State in that game. When you think of the forced fumble that he had and some of the big plays he had in that game, you're just like, that dude was wrecking that entire offense. You just had no chance because of the way that Cody Simon was playing in that game. Caleb Downs was a game wrecker in that game. You look at all those things, Trevor, and that's what the studs do, right? Cody Simon against Indiana, 10 tackles, 2.5 sacks, wrecked the game. Caleb Downs returning a punt for a touchdown, also had 5 pass breakups in the game. I mean, those are the things you look at and say, you want to beat a team like this, you need to have those type of individual performances where your studs go out there and be studs. And Indiana's going to try to do the same thing. If we were doing this show breaking Indiana down, we'd be doing the same thing. We're talking, hey, look, Elijah Surratt, you're our dude. We need you to be a dude. Curtis Rourke, you've been need you to be that guy. You know what I mean? And, hey, Mikhail Kamara, first team all Big Ten, 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. You got to be that dude. You know what I mean? We need you to be that dude. And so those are the things you look at for Notre Dame. those are the kind of players you need to be, right? I mean, you go through the whole season, close ball game. It's 14-0 Boise State against UNLV. 14-0, and UNLV is doing a pretty good job of keeping Boise State in check, right? What happens with like 30 seconds left in the half? Ashton Genty goes off and rips off a 75-yard touchdown run. I mean, that's what happens in those type of games. You talked about Kevin Jennings. You talk about what he did in that game. You talk about what Cade Klubnik made some big-time plays and runs in that game. You look at the Oregon game. Tess Johnson went off in that game. Which countered what the dudes for what Penn State did in that game. You look at what Cam Scatterbo did in that game. Everybody on the planet knew that Cam Scatterbo was carrying the ball in that game. There were certain situations on third and short. They knew who was going to ball. Didn't matter. Couldn't stop them. And that's what championship teams do, right? I mean, we've talked about, like, it wasn't Mike Williams that sparked Clemson in that game. It was Deion Kane. But who then took over? It was Deshaun and Mike Williams. Right, those are the things you talk about, and Notre Dame's going to need that. So let's have some fun making predictions, Trevor. Who are the game wreckers going to be on the Notre Dame offense against Indiana? If the Irish win this game, and we look back, you're going to predict who were the game wreckers for the Irish.
And I'm picking two on offense, right? First one, and I told you guys I was going to talk about this yesterday, the tight ends. Specifically Mitchell Evans, I think holds a major key in getting this offense going, right? Here's why, and I have some stats to back this up. Most of the time, Notre Dame's tight ends will be matched up on their linebackers and their safeties. Now, Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, they're two linebackers. Amari Farrell and Sean Asbury are their two safeties. That group combined this season has given up 109 receptions for 972 yards and 3 touchdowns. They allow receptions on 72.4% of all of their targets. So what does that mean from a game-to-game standpoint? That quad of players gives up about 9 receptions a game on average, with the most one being Aiden Fisher, who he got targeted 51 times this year. So per game, he's getting targeted at least 4 times, give or take. So what does that mean from Notre Dame's standpoint? I went and I broke down where the tight ends are. Now, Mitchell Evans is by far the most targeted out of the tight end room. Like, he has 39 targets on the season. The next closest is Eli Raridan with 10. But the thing that I found interesting with them is they have 40 as a tight end room. Mitchell Evans, Eli Raridan, and Cooper Flanagan. They have 41 receptions on the season and 7 touchdowns. So 17% of the time when they're getting the football, they're scoring touchdowns. Okay, they get receptions on 70.5% of their targets. That's the statistical matchup. From a physical standpoint, Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher are both 6'1" guys. Sean Asbury is 5'11". Amari Farrell's 6'2". He has good size at safety.
Sean Asbury's listed at 5'11".
I was giving his in cleats and helmet on height and weight. Yeah, but you go through and look, and Notre Dame's smallest tight end is Mitch Evans at 6'5.5". We saw what a slot fade with Eli Raridan looked like against a 6'1" linebacker against USC.
Fair.
I mean, just not fair. Not fair in the slightest. So am I expecting that all 3 of these guys go out and they all have the game of their lives? Would I be upset if that happened? No. Am I predicting that to happen? No. But Mitchell Evans is a guy where Brian and I both sat down and talked about, if he can get going in the postseason and come back as close to the form as he was in that middle of the season 2023 run, this Notre Dame offense is going to be really hard to stop. And he's coming off of his best game of the season against USC, where he had 5 receptions for 59 yards and a touchdown. So for me, game record number 1 on offense is going to be Mitchell Evans. My second one on offense, that's what we're doing, right?
We're just doing offense today. We'll do defense tomorrow. Yeah.
My second one on offense, and some of it kind of might be that, no duh kind of thing, but for me, it's Riley Leonard. He is not a quarterback. I'm sorry. He is not a quarterback that Indiana has faced this season. And when we were breaking down Notre Dame's passing attack, we highlighted all of the improvements that he made this season. I mean, he went from 129th in all of college football in passing efficiency to 38th. His yards per game average is going up. He's becoming a more effective member of the passing attack and not just being relied on for his legs. There will be moments throughout this playoff that Riley Leonard will have to go out and be that dude. He will have to go out and be the 2023 version of himself at Duke when they were playing Clemson. He will have to go out and be, I mean, honestly, that 2023 version of himself in moments in the Notre Dame game. You know, so Riley Leonard is going to have an integral role in this offense because they do have those supporting roles. They have Jeremiah Love. They have Jadarian Price. The receivers have to have a breakout game. But for all of those things to happen, the person under center conducting it and how it's going has to be top of mind. You know, Riley Leonard's the guy behind center calling out the different protections. We just broke down how intricate some of IU's defensive line games can be. You know, I just got done talking about Mitchell Evans and how he has to go off and all the targets that he's getting. Well, in order for him to get targets, Riley Leonard's going to have to facilitate. So my two are Mitchell Evans and Riley Leonard.
I dig it. So I don't want to repeat one you did, so I was angrily crossing off Riley Leonard.
I'm sorry.
Crapper. All right. So the one that I did have, Trevor, and I'm actually surprised you didn't go with this one, number 2. I thought if you were going to take one of mine, I thought this would be the one. Number 1 is I think one of the 2 slots goes off. Maybe both of them together. Either Jaden Harrison or Jaden Greathouse. One of those 2 is going to go off. For somewhat similar reasons that I think you mentioned. I think we know they're going to bring that nickel fire a lot. They're going to put those, which is going to put Notre Dame in situations where their slot receivers have to pick up. I think Notre Dame's running backs for the most part have been pretty good with blitz pickup this season. And I think that they're going to pick a couple of those up. You're going to get some situations where Jaden and Jeremiah, or Jaden and Jaden, right? Jaden with a Y and Jaden without a Y are going to go off a little bit and have some big plays. Maybe it's both of them together and you add them together and they were impactful, but I think at least one of those 2 really goes off in this game. I think it's partly about matchups, right? I mean, it's partly about, you know, their safeties are good players. They're not great cover players, in my opinion. They're guys that I think Notre Dame's guys can have some success with, in my opinion. And I really thought about picking an outside receiver, Trevor, but I'm at the point now where I gotta see it to believe it. I gotta see that Bo Collins is going to be that guy. I gotta see that Chris Mitchell's going to do that. I gotta see that Jordan Faison's going to do that. With these 2 kids, we've seen them be those type of things. I mean, you think about Jaden Greathouse just breaking that Navy game open with that big play on 3rd down early in the game. We've seen him with some super clutch 3rd down plays, because being a game wrecker sometimes isn't just about ripping off 40-yard gains, but it's like, okay, 3 of his first 4 receptions are on 3rd down against one of the best 3rd down defenses in college football. Those are all parts of it that you look at and say that's wrecking a game. It's like, okay, Jeremiah Love. We talk a lot about that Bo Collins back shoulder play.
Yeah.
Well, it was Jaden winning on 3rd down to get open and convert that 3rd down that even gave them that chance to get there.
Right.
Those type of plays too can be game wrecking type of plays. And here's a crazy stat for you. When you look at Notre Dame statistics, and again, this is from Pro Football Focus. I think this is a great statistic, Trevor. When I looked this up, I saw this and I was like, well, this doesn't surprise me at all. But if you look at 3rd down catches, Jaden Greathouse, Mitchell Evans, and Bo Collins are all tied for number 1 with 15. Bo Collins has been targeted 54 times. Jaden Greathouse has been targeted 35 times on 3rd down. And they have the same number of, or not 3rd down, same number of targets as far as picking up first downs. And so a little under half of Jaden Greathouse's catches have gone for first downs. And if you think about it and you go through it, he's had a lot of good 3rd down catches this season. And he had that big drop against Northern Illinois. He hasn't dropped the ball since. I mean, he's been money since then. Mm-hmm. And he's also Pro Football Focus, 4 catches on 5 contested targets, right? That's a very good rate for him in that situation. And so I look at those 2 guys and I'm saying those guys to me are going to be impactful in this game. I had Riley Leonard as my other one just for the reasons that you talked about, as far as he's just going to have to make big time throws. He's going to have to move the chains. He's going to have to be a good 3rd down runner, good 4th down runner. He's going to have to be good there. But I think the other part of it is one of the 2 backs is going to go off in this game with some big plays, whether it's Love or Price. I don't know which one, but the way that you take Indiana's soul in this game is you run on them. Because, Trevor, you and I have been you played high school football. I played high school football, played college football. I've coached. You're doing what you do now because you have a great mind for the game. We watch a lot of football. You see it in games when a team goes into a game and they're great at something and the other team goes right at them. And I remember watching the perfect example, the 2012 BCS game between Notre Dame and Alabama. When Alabama came out during that game and was gashing that Notre Dame defense, you could just see the look in the Notre Dame players' eyes like, wait a minute, what's going on? This isn't supposed to happen to us. We don't get run on. Nobody runs on us. And Alabama was gashing them. And you could just see the whole, like just the wind come out of the sails of the Notre Dame team. Like, holy crap, we're in trouble because they're doing the one thing that nobody's been able to do on us all year. And if their backs come out and start gashing Indiana, like Jeremiah Love did to USC, we talked about this. USC's defense coming in the Notre Dame game was playing at a very high level coming into that game. They were not giving up a lot of yards in that coming into that game. They had a couple games early where they'd given up some decent amount of yards. But as we talked about, the 6 games before the Notre Dame game, they'd given up 118 to Penn State on 3.8 per carry, 56 to Maryland, 121 to Rutgers, 113 against Washington, 119 to Nebraska, 111 to UCLA. If you want to took some comparisons, you want to have a little bit of fun with this one, Trev, let's look at this. So during that stretch where Indiana or USC was playing great run defense, they held Penn State to 118. Indiana didn't play Penn State, but they did hold Ohio State to 115. Penn State had a better rushing attack this year than Ohio State did. All right. They held Maryland to 56 yards rushing. Maryland had 112 against Indiana. They held Rutgers to 121. Rutgers obviously didn't play Indiana. Rutgers had a 1,000-yard back this season. That was one of the best run-stopping performances anybody had against Rutgers this season. This Rutgers team also rushed for 213 yards against Illinois, just to kind of put that out there. And they held them to 121, 2.9 per carry. They held Washington 113. Indiana held Washington to 116. They held Nebraska to 119. Indiana did better there, held them to 770. They held UCLA to 111. And Indiana held them to 96, 4.3 per carry for USC, 3.7 for UCLA. Very similar number. That was all leading into that Notre Dame game. Notre Dame went for 258 and 6.8 yards a carry. So, and you could just see it early when they were just gashing USC. They were just kind of like, this is going to be a long day, isn't it?
That first Jeremiah Love run set the tone. Because, I mean, one, he burst through the line of scrimmage and went untouched for 9 yards, 12 yards, and then got an additional push for another 5 to 6. And that was the moment, first play of the game on offense for Notre Dame, where I was like, yeah, this is going to be a long one for USC. Because you're right, man. I mean, we've played in games, you've coached in games where a team comes in and takes away one of the things that you feel confident in, and you're just like, oh, well, here we go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's
right.
And Notre Dame, to your point, has done a great job of doing that to opponents all year. You know, I mean, in multiple different ways. You know, teams have came in playing Notre Dame that don't give up turnovers. You know, and then what does Notre Dame do? They force not just one. They will force multiple. You know, Notre Dame comes into, you know, playing a defense that's really good at stopping the run. And Notre Dame's like, yeah, you're pretty good at it. Not good enough to stop what we got going on. And so that's what's going to make this matchup fun, man.
Yeah, and they tend to come in bunches. Talk more about that tomorrow. But when you look at the Notre Dame team this year, that sometimes those turnovers kind of come in bunches. You know, they had like a couple back-to-back against Texas A&M. Think about that Virginia game. I think it was like 3 in a row.
Yeah,
that they had, where it's just like, you know, it's a game where it was 7-0, and you knew Notre Dame was going to win. Notre Dame forced a fumble from Kobe Pace, and they went 80 yards and scored a touchdown. They're up 14-0, and there's like, couple minutes left in the half. They have a interception that Adon Schuler runs back to the 2-yard line, and Notre Dame punches it in the next play. The very next drive, Xavier Watts has an interception. Notre Dame goes down and scores then. And then they had it. Oh, actually, wait a minute. The first one was that Leonard Moore? No, it was Adon Schuler had the first one. Who had the second one? Leonard Moore had the second one.
Had the second.
And then they go down and score. And then Xavier picks another one off. and they should have gotten field goal range. Well, kicked a long field goal, missed it, but just comes in bunches. USC, you had the back-to-back pick sixes that put that game away. Speaking of USC, Trev, we're going to get out of here with a buy-sell hold from Iden Benami. Iden Benami, who I think is upset that we're not doing a buy-sell hold tomorrow, so he's going to get one in here. We appreciate you, Iden. He said, is USC a better overall team than Indiana? And the answer is a very clear, obvious, easy, no, they're not. Because of the way you phrase it, are they a better team? No, because if they were a better team, they wouldn't be 6-6 in the same exact league as what Indiana is in. And look, right. They played similar opponents. Indiana beat Maryland by 14. USC lost to Maryland. So Indiana beat USC by 14. USC lost to Washington. So they've played similar opponents. Indiana beat Michigan. USC lost to Michigan. So that they've played similar teams this season, Trevor, and Indiana beats them and USC doesn't. Now, if you wanted to ask, is USC a more talented team than Indiana? I would buy that.
Yep.
But this is where I think ESPN consistently gets wrong the playoff rankings and all this. They always look at talent. Well, Ole Miss is clearly one of the most talented. They may be one of the most talented teams. Bama may be one of the most talented teams, but they're not one of the best teams. Because best is defined by your results, not your talent. Florida State does not have a 2-10 roster. They are a 2-10 team. Indiana does not have an 11-1 roster, but they are without a doubt an 11-1 team. USC has an 11-1 roster. They're a 6-6 team. There's a difference. So if you were to ask me, buy so hold, Trevor, buy so hold, USC is a more talented team top to bottom than Indiana. Your answer would be what?
Buy sell.
More talented team? USC is more talented?
Buy. Sorry. Yeah.
Yep.
Buy. Talented.
Now, second one, what he said, USC is a better overall team than Indiana. Your answer would be sell. Exactly. We're same exact page. I knew what you meant. I think you didn't. You were reading what he said, what he wrote, not what I said. I kind of fooled you on that one accidentally. But you're exactly right, Trevor. More talented? Yes. Better team? Absolutely not. Not nearly as well coached. Not nearly as disciplined, not nearly as sound, not nearly as clutch. They don't play as hard as the Indiana kids. Not that USC doesn't play hard. That's one thing I give USC credit for. They never punked out. We all said before the season, if they lose games early, they will quit. One guy quit on that team. One guy. Everybody else battled. They battled Notre Dame. They had nothing to play for in that game, but they played.
Sure did.
Some people are like, oh, they're not going to play hard. They don't care about the rivalry. They played.
Mm-hmm.
And I give them a lot, those players and their, especially the defensive staff, a lot of credit for that.
Yep.
But I'll say that's the final thing too that I think was one thing that is a bit of an advantage for Notre Dame is they have played some defenses like Indiana schematically late in the year. USC does a lot of different stuff from a lot of different angles. Army throws a lot of different funky stuff at you. Navy throws a lot of different funky stuff at you. They've had to prepare for some of this funky stuff before. This won't be what they do is different, but the philosophy is something that Notre Dame has faced before. And Notre Dame has, for the most part, handled it well, but Indiana, I'd say, does it better than those other teams. The reason I say they do it better is because I think Indiana and Army are very similarly well coached and tough and all that, but Indiana just has better players.
Yeah.
They just have better players than Army does.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the difference.
Agreed.
So, Trev, that's where we're at, man. That's where we're at. You want to take us out here today?
Yeah, man, let's do it. Hey, thank you guys for being a part of this for the last couple, 2 hours and some change. There is going to be a lot more breakdown coming throughout the rest of this week on the boards. Brian and I are going to be back here tomorrow with 2 to break down essentially this show, but on the defensive side. And we're going to talk about what Notre Dame's defense has to do. And then Thursday, of course, we are going to be back with the Keys to Victory show, where we're going to break down what Notre Dame has to do, the areas that they have to win. And then I believe after that, you're going live with Bill Bender, right, to talk about the other slate of the college football playoff games. So
that show may start at 1, by the way, so just be on the alert for that one.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, in order to stay in the now and know when we are going live, make sure you hit that notification bell to know when Irish Breakdown goes live. Also, be sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button, and share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that loves Notre Dame as much as you do. And, of course, the best way that you can support us is subscribing to the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for Brian, I'm Trev. We will see you guys back here tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.